I'm asking for yes. Oh, maybe it's just no. I go right to AT&T Wi-Fi.
Well, good morning and welcome to the City Planning Commission public meeting. Madam Secretary, please begin.
Good morning. This is the City Planning Commission public meeting held at NYC City Planning Commission hearing room, Lower Concourse, 120 Broadway. Today is Wednesday, July 11th, 2018. As a courtesy during the proceedings, we ask that you please turn off all cell phones and beepers. All speakers should fill out a speaker's card. In addition, we ask that those providing testimony please identify yourself, limit your remarks to 3 minutes, and speak clearly into the microphone. I will now call the roll. Chair Lago.
Here.
Vice Chairman Knuckles. Commissioner Capelli. Commissioner Cerullo.
Here.
Commissioner De La Us. Commissioner Dweck.
Here.
Commissioner Edie.
Here.
Commissioner Efron.
Here.
Commissioner Knight.
Here.
Commissioner Levin. Here. Commissioner Marin.
Here.
Commissioner Ortiz. A quorum is present. The first item is the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of Wednesday, June 27, 2018, and special meeting of Monday, July 9, 2018.
On the minutes, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Minutes are approved.
Scheduling. On calendar numbers 2 through 6 and calendar numbers 10 through 18, we have resolutions for adoption, scheduling Wednesday, July 25th, 2018, for a public hearing to be held at NYC City Planning Commission hearing room, Lower Concourse, 120 Broadway. Calendar number 1 and calendar numbers 7 through 9 have been laid over.
On the resolution, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? The resolutions are adopted.
The next part of the calendar is the report section on page 37. Borough of the Bronx, calendar number 19, CD5, C150314, PQX. In the matter of an application for the acquisition of property concerning the LSSNY Early Life Center and Bronx Works Senior Center. For a favorable report on calendar number 19, Chair Lago.
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck.
Yes.
Commissioner Edie.
Yes.
Commissioner Efron.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight. Yes. Commissioner Levin. Yes. Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz. Yes. A favorable report has been adopted on calendar number 19. Borough of Brooklyn, calendar numbers 20 and 21. Calendar number 20, CD4, C180148ZMK. Calendar number 21, N180149ZRK. In the matter of applications for a zoning map and zoning text amendments concerning 1601 DeKalb Avenue rezoning. For favorable reports on calendar numbers 20 and 21. Chair Lago.
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck.
Please note my recusal on the matter.
Okay. Commissioner Edie.
Yes.
Commissioner Efron.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes.
Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz. Favorable reports have been adopted on calendar numbers 20 and 21. Borough of Manhattan, calendar number 22, CD10, C180249HAM. In the matter of an application for a UDAP designation, project approval, and disposition of city-owned property concerning Balton Commons. For a favorable report on calendar number 22, Chair Lago.
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck.
Yes.
Commissioner Edie.
Yes.
Commissioner Efron.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes.
Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes.
A favorable report has been adopted on calendar number 22. Borough of Queens, calendar number 23, CD5, C180280PCQ. In the matter of an application for the site selection and acquisition of property concerning DOHMH, Queens Pet Admissions Center. For a favorable report on calendar number 23, Chair Lago.
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck?
Yes.
Commissioner Edie?
Yes.
Commissioner Efron?
Yes.
Commissioner Knight?
Yes.
Commissioner Levin?
Yes.
Commissioner Marin?
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz?
Yes.
A favorable report has been adopted on calendar number 23. Borough of Queens, calendar number 24, CD8, C180241PCQ, in the matter of an application for the site selection and acquisition of property concerning Brinkerhoff Cemetery. For a favorable report on calendar number 24, Chair Lago,
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo,
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck?
Yes.
Commissioner Edie?
Yes.
Commissioner Efron?
Yes.
Commissioner Knight?
Yes.
Commissioner Levin?
Yes.
Commissioner Marin?
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz?
Yes.
A favorable report has been adopted on calendar number 24. Borough of Staten Island, calendar numbers 25, 26, and 27. Calendar number 25, CD2, N180419ZAR. Calendar number 26, N180441ZAR. Calendar number 27, N180442ZAR. In the matter of applications for the grant of authorizations concerning 460 Brielle Avenue for adoption on calendar numbers 25, 26, and 27. Chair Lago,
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo,
I just want to note, as I vote, that I very happily cast affirmative vote for this application, which will help facilitate the amazing work of the Grace Foundation, which is a not-for-profit service provider for people with autism. It serves much of the Staten Island community and many others off island. So yes, happily I vote yes.
Commissioner Dweck?
Yes.
Commissioner Edie?
Yes.
Commissioner Efron?
Yes.
Commissioner Knight?
Yes.
Commissioner Levin?
Yes.
Commissioner Marin?
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz?
Yes.
Calendar numbers 25, 26, and 27 have been adopted. The next part of the calendar is the public hearing section on page 44. Borough of Brooklyn, calendar numbers 28 and 29. Calendar number 28, CD7, C170212, ZMK. Calendar number 29, N170214, ZRK. Public hearing in the matter of applications for a zoning map and zoning text amendments concerning 57 Caton Place rezoning.
We will have a 10-minute presentation by 4 members of the applicant team, Marcy Kestner and Jason Little, and for questions, Allison Ruddock and Paul Selber.
Good morning, Chair, Commissioners. I'm Marcy Kestner, planner at Kramer Levin. With me are Jason Little, Mars Agni Architects, Allison Ruddick of EHB, which prepared the EAS, and Paul Selver, a partner of Kramer Levin. Just as an overview, this is an area that was mapped in 1961 to reflect then current uses. Nothing really changed there for over 50 years while the surrounding residential area grew. It's an important link between the thriving residential neighborhoods to the west and south and Prospect Park to the northeast. The zoning of the site needs to be updated and brought into the 21st century to encourage housing, including affordable housing, and to avoid the introduction of new inappropriate uses such as mini storage facilities. Let's see if I get this right. Yes. The development site is located on Caton Place and Ocean Parkway between East 8th Street and Coney Island Avenue. It's located 1 block southwest of Prospect Park in the predominantly residential Windsor Terrace neighborhood. It's served by mass transit at the Fort Hamilton and Church Avenue stations. It's shown on the aerial photographs above. The existing conditions of the site, the site is indicated on the photographs. It's improved with a 35-foot tall warehouse built to approximately 1 FAR. To the northwest is a corner lot with approximately 100 feet of frontage on 8th Street and 50 feet of frontage on Ocean Parkway. This city-owned lot is mapped as parkland and contains the ramp leading to the East 8th Street, Sherman Street pedestrian overpass. To the west of the development site is the Kensington Stable, which you can see in the photograph in the upper left, and to the right is a church complex, which you can sort of see in the lower left-hand photograph. The proposed rezoning area comprises lots 1 and 4 on block 5322. That's the development site is lot 4, 57 Caton, and then lot 1 to the left of that is the park site, which is the ramp to the overpass. The rezoning area, as you can see on the right-hand side, is currently mapped a 2-block C82 zoning district within the Special Ocean Parkway District. C82 districts permit uses such as offices, hotels, most retail uses, gas stations, other automotive uses, medical facilities, warehouses, mini storage. No residential uses are permitted, and there are no height limits. C82 districts are meant to bridge manufacturing and heavy commercial districts, which no longer really reflects the current surrounding local conditions. In 2006, the Commission approved an easterly extension of the Ocean Parkway R7A district between Ocean Parkway and Caton Place, just west of East 8th Street. The action before you is the extension of the existing R7A district to the east of East 8th Street to allow for a mixed-use development containing residences with ground floor local retail use at 57 Caton, within a contextual bulk envelope more in keeping with the surrounding Windsor Terrace context. The park lot will be maintained as parkland, and the rezoning will have no impact on it. I'm sorry. There are 2 zoning actions before the Commission today. The first is the zoning map amendment to an R7A C24 overlay Ocean Parkway District. This will allow the as-of-right development of the 9-story contextual residential building with ground floor retail use. The second action consists of 2 zoning text amendments to map the 57 Caton site only within the mandatory inclusionary housing area and to cross-reference that MIH area in the Ocean Parkway District text. Pursuant to the MIH program, the applicant proposes that, in compliance with option 1, the building would provide 25% of the residential floor area, or approximately 27 apartments, on-site as housing affordable to households earning an average of 60% of AMI. And in a letter to the Brooklyn Borough President last month, which was reiterated in the letter to the chair on Monday, which I think you all received, the applicant wrote, "We propose to provide 10% of the residential floor area to families earning 40% of AMI, 10% to households earning 50% AMI, and only 5% to households earning 120% of AMI, thus skewing downward in terms of the more lower income units." The applicant also wrote that the team intends to seek a locally based nonprofit housing organization to help choose the administering agent for the lease-up of the affordable units, but at this preliminary stage, a specific administering agent has not yet been selected. And as I said, this was repeated in my letter of July 9th. Jason Little of Morris Ajmi Architects will now briefly describe the proposed building design and uses for the as-of-right development that's proposed for this site. And then we'd be able to answer questions at the end, if you wish, with the others in our team.
Thank you. My name is Jason Little with Morris Ajmi Architects. So this slide shows the proposed site plan and illustrates the proposed development in relation to the existing conditions. We have the stables and the pedestrian ramp to the west, along with the existing undeveloped parking lot associated with the church building to the east. The proposed development will consist of 2 building segments separated by 65-foot, or actually 70-foot rear yard equivalent, with ground floor commercial use at the occupying a portion of that rear yard equivalent. A 30-foot deep front yard is provided along the Ocean Parkway in conformance with the special district regulations. The ground floor is organized with the more active uses along Caton Place, and the residential uses focused on Ocean Parkway. The retail entrance and the required parking entrance is located on Caton Place, along with a lobby serving the southern portion building segment. Entrances to these spaces are separated as much as possible from the stable, and with the parking being the furthest away. The Ocean Parkway frontage takes advantage of the 30-foot front yard and flanks the residential entrance with 2 apartments. Amenity spaces are planned at the ground floor, and they would make use of the exterior courtyard, and both lobbies would connect to that courtyard. So this, the floor plans show our intended unit mix. which ranges from studios to 3 bedrooms, with a total proposed of 107 units. And the unit mix provides nearly 50% of the units as 2 and 3 bedrooms. The building segments are separated by a rear yard equivalent exceeding the 60-foot minimum, and includes a landscape terrace above the commercial space. With this unit mix, and assuming 25% of the units are affordable, 40 parking spaces would be required. The development would provide up to 74 spaces that would be located in a cellar and a subcellar level. The neighborhood context includes several pre-war multifamily apartment buildings along Ocean Parkway. The buildings are typically 6 or 7 stories tall with masonry facades and punched window openings. Brickwork often includes decorative features and patterning, and the building massing is often divided into multiple volumes separated by courts or recessed areas of the facade. This is an illustrative rendering of the Caton Place frontage. We've taken cues from the neighborhood context, including masonry facade materials, punched windows, and the articulation of the massing through recessed courts. The building rises 7 stories at the street line with 2 additional floors set back 15 feet from the street line. The retail entrance and lobby are located on Caton Place, and they help activate the Caton Place frontage, activate the pedestrian experience, while the large windows and recessed balconies allow the residential floors above to engage with the neighborhood. The masonry detailing provides depth and shadow to the facade, while the proposed lot line windows help to mitigate the undifferentiated sidewall condition. The 8th and 9th floors would be clad with a different material to help diminish its presence. The Ocean Parkway frontage takes the same cues from the neighborhood context as the Caton Place frontage. The significant difference being that we're providing a dormer in the central volume, which we feel is appropriate on the very wide street of the Ocean Parkway. These aerial views show the proposed development in the immediate context of the surrounding buildings and show that many buildings nearby are of a similar height. And then this slide documents those building heights with specific heights nearby, one of the closest buildings being nearly 95 feet tall. That's what I have.
Thank you, and if there are any questions, we'd be happy to answer them now.
Thank you. I'd actually like to start by clarifying something that you said. You described this as an as-of-right building, but a building that needs a rezoning doesn't qualify as as-of-right.
Yes.
With that, I'll toss it open to the commission. Yes, Commissioner Efron.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair, for pointing that out. I was just wondering if there's any FAR available from either the church site or from the stable that might be contemplated as part of this, or
No, the building massing actually is the maximum massing permitted under the R7A.
right? I wasn't sure
district,
about
so-
floor to ceiling heights and whether or not you were trying to get another floor in there.
No, there's to my knowledge, there's no interest in that. I can get back to you if you have any specific. I can check that out, but I have not heard that.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Dweck.
So I noticed in the Borough President's comments about the extra parking spaces. Can you offer assurances that you will, in fact, provide those, and would you be willing to provide them to a car-sharing service?
Certainly, let's take the first one. At this point, the building has not really advanced beyond this schematic stage, and so as the building is fully designed, we'll be able to determine exactly how many parking spaces we can fit into the building. We studied for environmental purposes to be as conservative as possible, 74 spaces, and that's what we would hope to have, but we haven't designed the whole building yet, so we can't make right now a commitment about the 74 spaces. It's certainly the interest of the applicant to provide more than the minimum required pursuant to zoning. In terms of car sharing spaces, I can check with the client. They are permitted within under zoning. I think you're allowed a maximum of 5 spaces in the facility for car sharing, and we could certainly look into that.
And can I follow up on the ground floor? What does the proposed or intended use? And I know that the Borough President was interested in having a low volume use, such as a universal pre-K or a cultural community center.
As we've noted, and as the applicant has noted, this is 2 years out from from leasing, so we can't say specifically who's going to be rented there. It's the applicant's intent to rent to a locally based, local service, a retail entity, not to, and has said that they'd be interested in certainly in talking to pre-K or some other sort of use. But at this time, we have no specific users. A local market, a local store, something that would help service this neighborhood, which really doesn't have this place to walk to get many items.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Thank you. You took my question on the retail. To follow up on that, I found it interesting, and I understand these are renderings, but one of the things that I think is unique about this area is the tree cover. And do you anticipate putting street trees in? And is that part of the plan?
Yes, I mean, any building that's constructed has to provide street trees in accordance with DOT standards and park standards, which is every 25 feet.
Okay, so
as long as you're not within 50 feet of a corner, and I don't think we will be because the stable is in between. So there will be the required number of street trees planted in front of the building on both sides.
Thank you.
As long as it meets the standards of DOT and Parks Department.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Levin.
Yes, I have an architectural question, but before that, a comment. This is a very appealing building design, and I really appreciate the care that you took, Mr. Little, to explain the neighborhood context to us, and obviously worked to incorporate elements of that, or take cues, as you put it, into the design. So while I appreciate that you're only here for a rezoning and a text amendment, and you can go out and build whatever zoning allows, I certainly hope something like this is what actually gets built. And in that vein, the community board expressed a desire to see universal and inclusive design principles and sustainable design practices, both of which are elements that are important to us as well. So I wonder if you've thought yet in the design stage about how those principles might apply to the design here.
Sure. We have thought about those in a preliminary sense, and we're going to more fully develop them as we move forward. Speaking first to the universal design element, as you probably know, building in New York City, there are requirements that all units are adaptable, and we have plenty of experience with that and a lot of good tricks and techniques to make sure that happens and provides really a universal experience, whether it's a market rate unit or an affordable unit. That might even be just curbless showers, which everybody seems to like. At the same time, you want to have a bathtub if you have kids. So there's a lot of elements that go into play there. So absolutely all common spaces, the accessible route throughout the building, 100% accessible on day one. All units would be adaptable, and we'd be interested to work more with the community group to suss that out. As far as the sustainability measures go, we have been in talks about perhaps including bioswales along the sidewalk or at the tree pits. Obviously, that's going to include coordination with DOT and or parks, but we're interested in that in terms of further having that discussion. And certainly, rooftop pavers would be a low albedo to help mitigate the heat island effect, and we're going to integrate as much landscaping and green elements as possible.
Good. And one follow-up question has to do with the park ramp. How have you factored that into your thinking about the design at all? Are you aware that the community board was wanting to see some improvements there? Have there been any discussions with parks about, the ramp is your neighbor, so I assume you want it to be wonderful just as much as the community wants it to be wonderful.
We have not had conversations with the Parks Department at this time. Going forward, we will have conversations with them and with the council member, and I'm sure with the community to see if there are things that make sense for the park ramp.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
If you could just tell us how far from the ramp the building is.
Let's go back to the site plan. I can't zoom in, but this illustrates the approximate dimension. I'd say that looks to be about 10 to 12 feet.
Right, it's on an angle though, so where does it hit the building?
Where does it hit? I don't think, it's on its own tax lot, and it never engages with this new building.
I meant visually, so.
Right, so.
Yes.
I couldn't really tell you that. It's going to be between the first and second floor. It's going to be around the second floor.
All right, and I assume you're taking care to make sure that the visual.
So here's a good sense here. This rendering here does show it coming across. So it's going to really be, at the second floor level will be the ramp level, right?
That's helpful because the lot line, there are no lot line windows on
that
most
floor.
of that facade.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Other questions? Then thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker in support is Pasquale Filano.
Good morning. My name is Pasquale. I'm a porter at 10 Hudson Yards and a member of 32BJ. As you know, 32BJ is the largest property service workers union in the country. Over 35,000 32BJ members work at residential buildings like the one being proposed at 57 Caton Place. 57 Caton Partners, LLC, an affiliate of View Equities, has committed to creating high-quality building service jobs, and we want to see this project move forward. It is our estimation that when the building opens, it will be staffed by approximately 5 building service workers. We are happy to report that these jobs will be high-quality, family-sustaining jobs that pay building service workers the industry standard prevailing wage and benefits. The jobs created will allow workers at 57 Caton to take care of their families, pay their rent, and save enough for retirement. By making a commitment to providing good building service jobs that will pay the prevailing wage to local residents, we believe that View Equities has done the economically responsible thing. These good jobs will affect the well-being of the community for years to come. We believe that View Equities, as they continue to make commitments to creating good jobs, will be an asset to the community, and we hope that you will support this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Filano. Questions? Thank you. Now, those are the only folks who have signed up to speak on this matter. If there is anyone else present who would like to be heard, please come forward now. Okay, the public hearing is closed.
Borough of Brooklyn, calendar numbers 30 and 31. Calendar number 30, CD 15, C180029ZMK. Calendar number 31, N180030. ZRK, a public hearing in the matter of applications for a zoning map and zoning text amendments concerning 1881 through 1883 McDonald Avenue.
We will have a team presentation, a 10-minute team presentation by 3 members of the applicant team, Eric Palatnik, Russ Goichayev, and Hiram Rothkrug.
Hello. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. Thank you for having me. My name is Eric Palatnik, as I know many of you, and I hope your summer is going well and you had a nice 4th of July holiday. We are here today for a great project, which is really the first big change in this area on McDonald Avenue in a long time. It's a request for a rezoning and upzoning from an R5 to an R7A with a C24 overlay within the Ocean Parkway subdistrict that will facilitate the development of an 8-story, 85-foot tall residential building with ground floor commercial with 15 parking spaces at the cellar that will have 35 apartments, 11 of which will be affordable, 24 of which will be market rate at 80% AMI. I'm also happy to tell you we've met with Community Board 15 who supported the application. I know that was a question yesterday as to why were there 6 votes against the application. Those discussions really related to the fact that it was on McDonald Avenue and it was a new development on McDonald Avenue. And some of the people in the audience who don't live anywhere near there, most of Community Board 15, the the members live over in the Manhattan Beach, Sheepshead Bay area. So this is on the periphery. They couldn't understand this neighborhood and why somebody would want to live on the train line there. And the residents that live nearby who were there spoke in support of it and said that it's a great place to live. It's near mass transit, and that people want to live there. And that was the split and the six negative votes against the application. But there were many more in support of the application because it is in a good spot. It's situated to the south is Avenue P, Kings Highway, and to the north is Avenue P. I'll click through here for you to give you a little bit of the presentation so you could, I hit the wrong button maybe. There we go. All right. So this shows you the zoning maps that we're proposing. What we're proposing on the left side is the existing zoning map outlined in red. On the right side, you can see the R7A zoning district with the C24 overlay. What's interesting to note, and I'm going to keep calling it out to you as I talk, is that the bottom of the site of where it's outlined, you see Woodside Avenue. Woodside Avenue is sort of a unique little cut-in the mid-block that doesn't really exist all along McDonald Avenue anywhere else like that. Most of the blocks are, I forget how many hundred feet long, but you could see them above. This block gets cut in almost in like a third and then 3/4, or third and, yeah, I guess in third and 2/3. And that's relevant because we're going to talk about why this rezoning is appropriate based upon that condition. This takes you through a little bit more, just shows you the tax maps that we're talking about. Of course, the development site is at the top of the page, and the bottom of the page is the opposite corner on Quinton that we will be rezoning. That's just another map showing, again, the site outline. Take you through here a little bit more. This, again, gives you a better pictorial of the site. The rezoning area, where the word rezoning area is, that is not under our control, but it is within the rezoning area. This portion above it where it says site obviously is our site where we're planning to build our building. The rezoning area property, the one where it says rezoning area, is an Anderson Windows distributor that leases the facility on a month-to-month basis right now from the owner. The owner of the property is anxious to develop in accordance with what we should be approved here today, and he's supportive of the application. And also of extremely relevant note here is the applicant himself, who's here today in the audience, who's the applicant sponsor of this proposal, lives right next to the building that says rezoning area, the Anderson Window building. If you look to the right of the word rezoning, you'll see a rather larger home that probably took advantage of the fact that he's within 100 feet was within 100 feet of a corner, didn't need a rear yard, and he's got a basketball court there. And that is Mr. Batesh's home, who is here today. He is the applicant, and to show you how much he supports the application, he's supporting a rezoning that's an upzoning that's going to butt right up against the back of his property. And he, along with many other people in the area and his neighbors, all support this. Because McDonald Avenue, for years, I don't have to tell you, it hasn't been the highlight of New York City necessarily. So I'll continue onward. Here's some more pictures. Excuse me. What you're looking at here is the Brooklyn Window and Door site, which is the Anderson Windows. And I'll keep cutting through here. These are just some other taller buildings in the area. And this is our site, some pictures of that. The building on the left is a home. The tenants in there is one family. They're on a month-to-month basis. The applicant has advised them that they will relocate them in the neighborhood to a similar accommodations when this takes effect. To the right, you see an old building, which is the building that we're going to be tearing down, a commercial building. It's got a specialty boot store. If you're looking for specialty cowboy boots, it's a very unique and a rare place in New York City. He's going to be relocated. He's going to be retiring, excuse me, the gentleman that runs that. He's an elderly gentleman, and he's winding down his business. Above that is a mosque that's on a month-to-month basis. In the back of the building, behind here's the building, a clearer shot of it. You can see ABECO is the name of it. That's Abe Batesh, who's the applicant sponsor. In the back is a limousine company where they park limousines. This is a building next door to us on Quinton Road, just showing you that it's 4 stories and there's some taller buildings. I'm going to take you through now to the plans. This is an overview of the building. This is an elevation looking at the building from Quinton. You can see it rises to a height of 85 feet. What's very nice to see, I'm sure from your perspective, is the right side. I'll call your attention to the right side of this plan. You're seeing there a setback from the residential homes that are on the right side of, first of all, there's an 8-foot side yard, which is the first separation on the right side. But then that 8-foot falls within a 25-foot setback that's required under section 23-693 of the zoning resolution. Whenever you have an upzoning, a higher zoning district next to a lower zoning district, there has to be a separation to protect the adjacent homes. So this is rezoning will protect the adjacent lower scale homes by providing that separation, which although it's only required to be 25 feet, we actually have extended it to 29 feet, and it cannot extend in that 25 feet portion above 5 stories, but we happen to have kept it at 1 story at that side of the building. Clicking around here, these are the affordability numbers, which I could talk about briefly for you. Just very simply speaking, as I spoke about a moment ago, it's at 80% AMI, and the community board was supportive of that, as was the councilman. I click through. These are the plans. Getting to the plans, this takes you to the cellar level. At the top right corner, you'll see a car elevator. That's Quinton Road, the right side of your page. That should have been labeled. I apologize. In the bottom is McDonald. The cars will come into that car elevator there at the first floor level, and they'll be whisked downstairs to where you see 15 spaces. The development is only required to provide 7 spaces. We're providing 15, though. The bottom of the page shows you accessory commercial space. Clicking, this is the first floor plan. Again, the right side, this is labeled as Quinton, the bottom is McDonald. You see the retail has really been geared towards McDonald's. It's really more of a commercial kind of street, whereas the residential entrance is over on the Quinton side. That's the shaded portion, is everything residential. The car elevator that I showed you a second ago is at the top right corner of the page. This gives you typical floor plans. As you move through the building, I'm gonna skip ahead though a little bit to take you to show you this, where you start to get to the 6th floor plan. You can see the difference. If you look at this is the 3rd, 4th, and 5th floor plan. If you look at the left side, and now you look at this plan, you see how it gets shorter, the building. It gets tapered in. This is what I was speaking about a moment ago, the setback requirement of the 25 feet to protect the residential neighbors. So this is on the McDonald's side. So you see both sides of the building have setbacks. I'm glad that's not my phone. It very easily could have been. Continuing onward, we have some rooftop area there. It's all landscaped. It's a green roof. We met with the borough president. We met with Richard Bierak, who's an asset to Brooklyn. Went through great detailed lengths about minority women-owned businesses being involved, about green measures, about sound attenuation. I know the commission had some questions about sound attenuation. We are up against the elevated rail. And if everybody's ever seen the Blues Brothers, there's a scene in there with Carrie Fisher where they're sort of up against the elevated rail. It's loud. So we have designed it in a way to provide sound attenuation. 38 dBA will be on all the windows facing McDonald Avenue. And Hiram Rothkrug, who's our environmental consultant with Environmental Project Data Statements Company, is here, and he's signed up to speak after me. So if you have more questions about that, he'd be happy to answer them. Do you have a question, Madam Chair? I see you're gesturing. Okay. And now I'll finish up. I'm wrapping up right now. This is an elevation of the building along McDonald Avenue. Again, the left side is what I've been calling to your attention the whole time, these setbacks that the zoning requires that provide some consistency, some matching to the neighbors next door. And that's a plot plan of the building, an overview looking at it from above. You can start to see here, if you just look at the 8-story, the 6-story in the corner, the 1-story on the right, the building is rather playful. It sets back all over the place. And I will show you here some imagery that the architect has developed, which I'm sure you're probably very interested in seeing. On the 2nd floor, you have a person waving to you. But more importantly, you could see here how the building would lay out in relation. This is looking at it on McDonald Avenue, obviously. This gives you the perspective. Obviously, the building will not be painted this color. I don't know why Russ chose this, but this is no indication of the facade treatment. But it is meant to give you an idea of the bulk of the building in the envelope. And you can start to see the way he did the overhangs and the way he did some of the setbacks. The building is respectful of the neighborhood, doesn't overpower the street, and plays in relation to the elevated rail, I think, really nicely, as well as to the streetscape on Quinton. That's it. That's our application. So thank you for letting me speak for 10 minutes, and I see I'm right on time. Thank you.
Okay, but I will note that you have used the time of the other members of the applicant team, and so they will not be able to make presentations.
I wasn't aware of that. I'll be happy to answer any questions they have.
Well, what I would note for the commission is the applicant team is also comprised of Russ Goychev and Hiram Rothkrug, so they are also available for questioning at this point. Questions from the commission? Commissioner Dweck.
Thank you. So if you look at the borough president's recommendations, you'll note it was fairly clean recommendations, but His first recommendation was if you can speak to the outreach or the that you have done with a local development. Housing.
Thank you for raising that. I didn't speak to that, and I probably should have. We've been working very closely, and we actually just made a handshake deal yesterday afternoon with Jay Marcus of the Fifth Avenue Committee. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Fifth Avenue Committee. They're very well respected. They are going to be the administering agent on the affordability component. So thank you for asking. I meant to include that in my presentation.
Thank you. And I will note, I live very close to the building, and I think that McDonald Avenue is appropriate for that density and height. So I think it's a corridor that could be greatly underutilized today. So I will say that much. And I don't have a problem living a block from the train.
I agree from it. I agree with you. Thank you for saying that.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning. You mentioned a few commitments above and beyond the zoning that reflect the design. The distance from the residential to the rear. This is just a rezoning. So how will those commitments be memorialized?
They're actually governed by the zoning resolution itself, section 23-693, and that's why I was calling it out for just that reason, that it's committed that way it's obligated to be that way by the underlying zoning that we're asking you to put in place. Itself contains controls that prevent the development from encroaching.
Okay, I misunderstood.
Yeah,
You're
no,
making
and
a
that's
commitment beyond that. Okay.
Yeah, so that's how it's done. You're welcome.
Other questions? Okay, then I will thank the applicant team. I will note that there is no one else who has signed up to speak either in support or in opposition. But if there's anyone in the audience who would want to be heard, now would be the appropriate time. Okay, the public hearing is closed.
Borough of Manhattan, calendar numbers 32, 33, and 34. Calendar number 32, CD2, N170115ZRM. Calendar number 33, C170116, ZSM. Calendar number 34, C170117, ZSM. A public hearing in the matter of applications for its zoning text amendment and for the grant of special permits concerning 27 East 4th Street.
Okay, I will reiterate what Madam Secretary had said at the beginning. First, we will have a 4-member applicant team who will collectively have 10 minutes for the presentation. We will then go to 5 speakers in opposition, speakers in support, speakers in opposition, with each speaker limited to 3 minutes of presentation. With that, I'll introduce the applicant team: Jeremiah Kondraven, Edward Carroll, Joe Mugford, and Greg Spindler.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. My name is Jeremiah Kondraven. I am the counsel to the applicant. I thank you for the opportunity to present before you. As you know, this is a proposal to construct an 8-story contextual street wall building at 27 East 4th Street. The development is proposed to be utilized as either Use Group 5 transient hotel or Use Group 6 office above the level of the 2nd story. Proposed uses to be located below the level of the 2nd story include a lobby for the hotel and/or office, as well as a small neighborhood restaurant, which consists of approximately 25 tables. The proposed restaurant is Use Group 6 commercial use. The cellar level is proposed to be utilized as either Use Group 5 or Use Group 6 accessory uses, including back-of-the-house hotel use. As you know, the site is adjacent to the Merchants House Museum, which is both an individually designated and an interior designated landmark structure. Because the property is located within the NoHo Historic District extension, the demolition of the existing building and the design and the construction of the proposed building required landmarks approval, which we received on April the 8th of 2014, as well as a design-only certificate of appropriateness that was issued by the LPC on April the 6th of 2018. The zoning approvals that are before the Commission in connection with this application comprised of 3 actions: a text amendment to the provisions of 74-712A and B, as well as a special permit pursuant to 74-712A and a special permit pursuant to 74-712B. I think it's appropriate at this time to provide the Commission with a brief history of the provisions of 74-712. Many of you know that I am a former city planning employee and was the Director of Environmental Review for the Department of City Planning for many years. The provisions relating to 74-712 were modified initially in 1997. And at that time, the Commission permitted bulk modifications on vacant lots. The Commission at that time is quoted as saying that they believed that the new tool would help promote the development of buildings that are more contextual to historic districts than buildings that might otherwise be developed as of right pursuant to zoning. This is exactly what the applicant is proposing to do. We're proposing to develop an LPC-approved contextual street wall building with massing that is more consistent within the historic district than an as of right height and setback building. You should also know that the provisions of 74-712 have been amended over the last 20 years to include waivers, use waivers, and to expand the list of eligible sites for use and bulk waivers under the special permit in historic districts and in the M15A and in the M15B zoning districts. Examples of those are text amendments in 2003 and 2006 that allowed use and bulk regulations on land both with minor improvements and with parcels of property that were covered with 20% of lot coverage. In the Commission's compendium report in the 2003 application for 465 Broadway, the Commission found that it did not believe that the replacement of any of these buildings with new structures approved by landmarks would be adverse to the historic district and contrary to public policy. Further, in 2006, in the compendium report for 311 West Broadway, the Commission noted that the design of the building results in changes which were made at the request of landmarks and which led to the subject request for bulk modifications and those that respond to the scale and context of the surrounding area. This is exactly what the applicant is proposing to do, develop an LPC-approved contextual street wall building with massing that resulted from changes that were made during the landmarks approval process. I also note that the Commission disagreed with the recommendation of Community Board at that time, which was to maintain existing street wall requirements in the M15 zoning district, and the Commission noted that the underlying M15 height and setback requirements would, quote, conflict with the original intent of this section. Two other examples in closing on the text amendment history occurred in 2013 and 2016, respectively. In the compendium report for 300 Lafayette, the Commission believed that vacant lots and underutilized sites in NoHo Historic District and allowing modifications of use and bulk regulations by special permit would facilitate development of vacant and underutilized sites and help strengthen historic districts' built character. The same conclusion was reached in 2016 in the compendium report for 150 Worcester Street, in which the Commission is noted as saying the expanded applicability of the zoning text would provide and enhance opportunities to fill in the gaps along Soho's mid-blocks and avenues and reinforce its scale, street wall, and continuity and predominantly built-out character. And again, that's exactly what we're doing. We're proposing to fill in the gap that exists from the existing one-story building and replace it with an LPC-approved contextual street wall building. I note that the applicant's proposal meets each and every of the requisite conditions and findings set forth in 74-712A and 74-712B, respectively. And at this time, I would like to introduce you to Edward Carroll, who's the project architect, and then Joe Mugford, our engineer, who can speak to all of the issues relating to and are very important relating to construction protection issues and our adjacency to the Merchants House Museum. Prior to me turning it over, I do want to note for the record that Chair Tierney of the Landmarks Preservation Commission noted that from a letter from the Parks Department that the agency deemed the enhanced monitoring program, which includes a pre-construction survey of the Merchants House and exceeds building code requirements, satisfactory. In addition, counsel to Landmarks noted that Tim Lynch, the executive director of the Department of Buildings Forensic Engineering Unit, had also determined that the plan was appropriate at the time of Landmarks approval. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ed Carroll.
Thank you, Jed. Madam Chair, Commissioners, my name is Edward Carroll. I'm with SRA Architecture and Engineering, and I represent the applicant. Just briefly, when we approached Landmarks with this project, we came in with an as-of-right proposed building and a street wall building. Their immediate reaction was, we'd like you to pursue a street wall building. which we did. And the drawing in front of you represents that journey. So we started with a building that picked up on some of the taller characteristics of the street. Can I go backwards with this someplace?
That's the first. Do you want to go this way?
Backwards one, yeah. Which, as you see here, from Lafayette moving east, the buildings are quite tall. We then negotiated with them to come up with buildings which were more sympathetic to the character of the remainder of the block, and we resulted in a building which was roughly 8 stories. That building, which is on the right-hand side, was approved by Landmarks, and it represents the absolute minimum relief that we're seeking in order to achieve a street wall building, which is what Landmarks would prefer, and to try to mitigate any impact on the community. That building on the right is 90 feet tall, and if you're familiar with the height and setback regulations, we are allowed 6 stories or 85 feet. Now we're 8 stories, so we are seeking relief for those additional 2 stories. The relative height above the permitted 85 feet is roughly 6 feet. So we feel as though, working with Landmarks and understanding the sensitivity of this project, that we came up with a solution that would absolutely require the minimum amount of relief from City Planning Commission to achieve the project. The other major and significant issue is how to build this building with the least impact upon the adjacent property. Obviously, the Merchant's House is a significant contributing building to the city's history. I'm going to turn this over to Joe Mugford right now, who is a structural engineer, to discuss the specific factors we have implemented in order to minimally impact the existing structure of the building adjacent to us. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm going to talk briefly about the design, supportive excavation, and construction monitoring program of the proposed building at 27 East 4th Street. Our design and monitoring program has taken into account the recommendations of both the New York City Department of Buildings, the Parks Department, the Landmarks Preservation Commission, and the neighbors and their respective consultants expressed over several interactions and meetings with these parties over the last several years. The design and monitoring program meets the requirements of the New York City Building Code, Technical Policy and Procedure Notice 10 of 88 for the avoidance of damage of historic structures resulting from adjacent construction. The new building will replace an existing 1-story structure that currently occupies the site with a new steel-framed building, and the existing masonry walls of the existing building will remain in place during the construction. The excavation and foundation will match the elevations of the existing foundations of the neighboring buildings. This avoids underpinning of the neighboring buildings. The new building will be founded on a mat foundation to minimize settlements of the existing subgrade. This anticipated settlement will be 0.18 inches, which is even less than the 1/4-inch settlement allowed by TPPN 10 of 88 for neighboring buildings. And the new structure will shield and brace the Merchant House from wind.
I'm afraid the applicant's team time has been used up. At this point, we'll turn it over to the commission for questioning. Commissioner Levin.
Well, I would be. This is a critical issue, and I'm wondering if there is additional detail that you would like to provide to us about the construction protection plan.
Yeah, I could fill you in briefly. I mean, the supportive excavation and the construction will follow a controlled sequence of the Merchant House during construction. The excavation is stabilized 9 feet away from the Merchant House with an augured pile retaining wall, and the roof of the existing 1-story building will remain in place during the excavation and construction of the foundations, the first floor and the second floor of the new structure, to both maintain the bracing of the Merchant House and protect the excavation from weather. The monitoring program during excavation and demolition of the existing structure will be achieved with a real-time automated total station monitor that will report any displacements that occur of 15 survey points that we've recommended on the Merchant House. And we've also created an additional vibration level threshold of 0.2 inches per second to help anticipate avoiding the 0.5 inch per second threshold that is required by TPPN 10 of 88. Thank you.
So have you completed the existing conditions survey of the Merchant House, or?
No, we have not.
Okay, and is that a step that you would have to take before you
Yeah, so
begin
several.
to understand
There's a
what is there?
pre-construction survey which we anticipate will be a complete photo documentation, a survey of the existing structure for both plumb and level, and a video documentation of interior accessible spaces and the exterior, as well as interacting with their consultants to see any concerns that they may have regarding the existing structure.
Okay. Well, I think we're all aware that they have some pretty serious concerns. Have you even begun that? Are you in conversation with them about this project?
Yes, we've had a few meetings and provided some, design information and drawings to the merchant house and their consultants.
Okay. Well, I expect we might hear more about that in the minutes to come.
Commissioner Efron.
Thank you. In the name of context, we are trying to understand how to keep this really historic contributing building that's, as you said, contributing not only to the historic block, but also to the city. And my question is really about the excavation. How many stories are you planning to excavate, or how many feet are you planning to excavate, and what is the methodology?
So there's currently an existing filled-in cellar from the original building that occupied this site that was 3 stories. The anticipation is to go no deeper than what was the foundation of the original building, and to not go deeper than both the existing masonry walls that are on our site, nor the foundations of the neighboring merchant house or the neighbor 25 East 4th Street.
And what is the means of excavation? Is it mechanical or by hand?
It would be some by hand, and then others by, maybe moving with small machines. But we would be open to to discussing that further. I mean, they're very restricted on what sort of equipment they could use within a 1-story existing building that's going to remain, and the associated constraints that go with that.
Yeah, I'm just aware in other historic districts where there have been agreements made with hand versus
Just to clarify, by hand, which would be small equipment, and hand digging is what is planned to be done. There will not be mechanical means of excavation utilized on the sites, which would be large equipment or bulk demolition. So yes, the answer is the foundation will be excavated by hand as defined by the building code.
Yeah, I guess I'd want some more clarity on what by hand means, since it sounds as if it may be a defined term that is other than by hand.
Yes, we would be happy to provide you with that definition. I think it's just also just to reiterate that the existing building will remain in place because the existing building provides support today, and our existing walls, which are outlined in green in that graphic, will remain. We are not taking them down. We're not intending to remove them. They will stay in place to provide additional protection to the Merchants House Museum. And what we plan on doing is doing the excavation work within the interior of our existing building, and only after excavation is done will other work commence. But as you heard from Mr. Lynch yesterday, the 2 key points of potential damage are during excavation and foundation work. And so we're taking extraordinary measures during the excavation and foundation work by setting the building away, completely away from the Merchant's House, to stay outside of the line of influence, which reduces the potential for a vibration and movement, as well as excavating within an existing building, as opposed to just coming in and demoing everything and creating vibration issues.
I have one more question about the excavation. Since the key doesn't show what the dotted line is for, except as existing roof structure, is there additional excavation past the lot line or past the building line of the Merchant House that would take place? So that would there be any excavation beyond the covering and structure of the existing building?
In the rear. No,
because we have our building is full.
Okay, so that's going full. So there would be no area of excavation other than what is within the current structure.
Correct.
Okay.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Levin.
I have 2 unrelated questions. One about your neighbor to the west, and another about an issue raised in the Borough President's recommendation. 25 East 4th Street, the neighboring building on the other side, does it have lot line windows all along your lot line?
Yes, it does.
And are those going to be, what's the situation with those windows, and what are you doing to them?
Okay, Commissioner Levin, thank you. It's a good question. So if we've provided you with a graphic that shows the lot line windows, and it shows as well the area of relief that we're requesting from the commission, which is the light gray area. The light gray area affects 3.5 windows, 4 windows, 4 lot line windows.
So the upper left-hand corner.
The upper left-hand corner, right. The city has never taken the position, ever in my history with government and outside of government, that lot line windows are a protected resource. We have never granted a light and air easement to that building for lot line windows. And then there's a question of whether or not what the purpose of the lot line windows are utilized for. They certainly aren't permitted to be utilized for residential legal light and air, and I know not what they're used for, but they are lot line windows.
Wait, do you know what they're?
I know not what they're used for, so I don't know. They're not permitted to be utilized for legal light and air. So because they're lot line windows, meaning they can't count for bedrooms, and I don't know what they're used for, but city has never taken a position to protect lot line windows.
Okay, is that a residential building? I believe it was a residential conversion.
I believe it is a residential building.
Okay, so whether or not they are legal, do we know how those windows came to be?
I do not know.
Have they been there for a long time? Were they added as part of the conversion? And are you in conversation with the residents of that building?
Yes, our development team, well, I don't know the history of the windows, but our development team has had extensive conversations over many years with both 25 and 29 East 27th Street, meaning Merchant's House as well as that residential building. We believe at one point we were very close to having a construction protection plan in place, but it was pulled back by the Merchant's House Museum at some point, and at that point discussion stopped. And in trying to provide you with an additional answer to your first question, is if the City of New York, through the Parks Department or any other agency, can provide us access to the Merchant's House Museum's property, we are ready, willing, and able today to prepare an extensive pre-construction survey to document all existing conditions and or latent conditions that we can identify to properly frame what the issues exist and to address those issues in a construction protection plan.
Have you asked for that access yet?
We have had discussions regarding the construction protection plan as well as what would be required for an appropriate, commercially reasonable construction protection plan. Gary Spindler is the owner, and we ran out of time, but he can speak a little bit more about that if you'd like him to come to the podium on that issue.
Well, maybe I'll leave it to one of my colleagues to follow up on that line of question, because I do have one additional question I wanted to ask. You didn't pick an easy site here. The borough president has suggested the same owner has property around the corner on Lafayette, and that would be a much easier and more appropriate place for a hotel. Can you tell us about those discussions with the borough president's office and what the situation is with that site and
yes,
whether this?
Of course. And with that, I would like Gary to come up because he's better placed to answer this question.
I'll note that he was registered as a member of the applicant team.
By way of introduction, Gary Spindler is the principal and the owner of the site, as well as the property in question that was referenced in the borough president's recommendation at 403 Lafayette. Gary?
First of all, we've owned this site for 20 plus years, so it's not like it's a new thing and we bought it and we're hoping and praying that we can get past. We bought the site before this was the NoHo extended district. So, we didn't realize that this would eventually be a landmark site or a landmark district, and we'd have to go through the steps to get to where we are today. We have been, over the years, in talks with the Merchant's House Museum to come up with a protection and construction agreement. At one point, several years ago, we thought we were close. Talks died. Recently, in the past 4 or 5 months, talks got started again. We've answered a lot of their questions. For the past 6 or 7 weeks, we've been waiting for responses, kind of being a little bit stonewalled by them to get to this point. The next question was with regards to transferring our air rights.
Yeah, 403.
Yeah, shortly after we learned that 27 East 4th Street wasn't a landmark district, we had preliminary discussions with landmarks. That was probably dates back to about 2005, 2006. And at that time, we were told that they believed that transferring air rights would be unworkable. Besides, there are several other factors. The length of touching, or how do they say it? The continuity of the lot line to transfer. It's not, we don't have enough lot line. So we would have to go through a whole nother process to get there. Today, we run a parking garage at the site, services the community. We have a rent-a-car in the site servicing the community, and we have no plan except to continue to run that garage for the, at least short-term or foreseeable future. We're here today because Landmarks passed this project, and, it's shovel-ready. We're ready to move forward and, come to a mutually acceptable agreement with the Merchants House and also the neighboring building at 25 East 4th. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that additional detail. I wonder if there's anything more you would like to tell us about your relationship with the 25 East 4th Street. You told us the history of your efforts to converse with the Merchants House Museum. Has there been a similar engagement with 25?
Not as in-depth because, we knew that we had to come up with the proper protection plan to get past landmarks. So we were in constant discussions with the Merchants House, with PI, and 25 East 4th Street was always there in the background. We initially had meetings with them when we presented to landmarks. We actually pulled the case back from the community board at the request of 25 East 4th Street because they wanted to see the plans a little bit before we presented, so we pulled them back. We stopped the process. I think we actually got voted okay by the community board, and then they had a rehearing because we stepped it back, and then they disapproved the hearing. And then today we have small discussions. Recently, they needed to do a facade inspection on their building, so we entered into agreement to allow them to do a short-term facade inspection. The impact to their building, except for the lot line windows, is going to be minimal. So we will enter into some sort of agreement with them. They've reviewed our protection plan because we're going to have a sidewalk bridge that runs in front of their property. I don't believe we will need rooftop protection because our building will be lower than their building. But we also had their engineer look at our sidewalk bridge and some protection and noted their comments to that plan as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
And may I just note for the record that Gary...
Actually, no, at this point, it's questions from the commission.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, then I will thank the applicant team.
Thank you very much.
At this point, we will now go with 5 speakers in opposition, each for 3 minutes, beginning with Anita Brandt.
Good morning. My name is Anita Brandt. I'm the CB2 co-chair of the Land Use Committee. As you know, the old Merchants House is next door to this application. In the April 2018 meeting of the Land Use Committee, 8 speakers and approximately 200 individuals opposed the application because of the possibility of massive irreparable harm to the foundation, underpinning, and original decorative plaster as a result of the demolition and construction. In our resolution, which is rather extensive, and I'm just picking out a few things here, we refer to the testimony of the executive director of the Historic House Trust, who pointed out deficiencies and inaccuracies in the project's EAS statement. The following are just 2 concerns. The application indicates there is no effect on a public resource, but the Merchants House is in fact a publicly owned land under the jurisdiction of New York City Parks. Construction next door will likely require the house to close for an extended period of time and for the collections to be removed out of the house, preventing it from serving its mission as a public museum. Another concern is that the legend and map for the shadow section describe the rear yard of the museum as a vacant lot. It is in fact a public garden on New York City Parks Department land. This section must include more details of the old Merchant's House so that the impacts are understood. The proposed text change would affect no other site citywide and thus represents an effort to alter the zoning resolution to serve the private interests of the applicant exclusively with no public benefit and with substantial harm to the museum. In conclusion, the full board of CB2 voted unanimously to recommend denial of this application unless and until the proposed development is modified so as to avoid all harm to the Merchant's House. And I have a few more minutes, so I would like to mention that this museum holds a special place for me. It was closed for 9 years, and during that time, I worked with the architect Joseph Roberto and did my undergraduate thesis on this house. It affected my direction of my career, so life is full circle. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony and especially the personal reminiscence. Any questions for Ms. Brent? Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker in opposition is Andrew Berman.
Good afternoon. My name is Andrew, or good morning. I'm the Executive Director of the Greenwich Village Society for Historic Preservation, the largest membership organization in Greenwich Village and the East Village. I'm here today to urge you to reject the proposed zoning text amendment and special permits for 27 East 4th Street. The reasons are many. First, this is in essence a spot zoning, just wearing a slightly complicated and convoluted garb. Second, it would allow uses which are undesirable and unnecessary at this location. Third, and most importantly, it would facilitate a development on this site which appears to present a grave danger to the neighboring Merchant's House Museum. The museum is one of New York City's first designated landmarks, a rare interior and exterior landmark, and a state and federal landmark, as well as New York City's only family home preserved intact inside and out from the 19th century. Since 1936, it has also been an invaluable historic, cultural, and educational resource open to the public. Given that the City of New York has invested millions of dollars over the years to buttress, restore, and repair the Merchant's House, any decision to potentially endanger it in this way would be particularly confounding. It is also unnecessary. It's our understanding that the developer controls the lot, which extends all the way to Lafayette Street. A development could be shifted to that part of the site without endangering the Merchant's House or any other building. This would be a vastly preferable outcome, not only for the Merchant's House, but for this neighborhood and for New York City. It's not worth risking the catastrophic and irreversible damage which the Merchant's House Museum could suffer if this development moves ahead. I urge you to consider the bigger picture here. Reject the application before you and help ensure the survival of one of New York City's great historic and cultural gems. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Berman. Questions? Yes, Commissioner Reedy.
Good morning. Is your position, therefore, that nothing should ever be built on this site?
Certainly nothing that would endanger the Merchant's House.
And the distinction is, when you say, so the assumption, therefore, is you would allow something to be built there if it didn't endanger the house.
Correct.
But what could be built there that might not endanger the house?
Well, I don't claim to be an engineer. I know that the Merchant's House, who has some great experts who are going to be speaking to you later, have looked at this, analyzed it, and said it would present that danger. I think that if reliable experts said that a development project on the adjacent site was safe for the Merchant's House, then we would not have an objection, assuming that all other issues were in order. But that's not what we're presented with today.
Understood. Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Berman.
Thanks.
Our next speaker in opposition is Kurt Hirschberg.
Thank you very much for your time. As an architect and as a historic preservationist, I'm particularly concerned about this important, significant resource. Scale and massing are important elements that preserve the character of a neighborhood and a block. Philosophy of contextual zoning is deep-rooted in the history of New York, especially in Manhattan. This whole notion of introducing spot zoning for this one parcel is going to have a detrimental impact to the overall character of the neighborhood. And one thing that you could see time and time again with the images that came up, it was very focused westward of the Merchants House block, never looking at the context that's eastward or the context that's across the street. In addition to the detrimental impact to the overall character of the block and the neighborhood, the construction of this building will undoubtedly create an adverse impact to what can be considered the most important historic resource in the city of New York. The impending damage to the structure, the significant interior finishes that are largely intact in the building, as well as the potential loss of any historic fabric, certainly must be considered in your evaluation of this proposal. In my opinion, as well as many others, this is far too important of a building in the city of New York to take a chance. Working with the site for a number of years, we were intently involved with the construction of the Woodard Tunnel next door. And one thing we learned in that process, the monitoring requirements by the Department of Buildings for vibration, things like that, are the bare minimum. They are generated primarily for impacts on steel and masonry structures. They really don't reflect the impact on wood and plaster. What we have here is a masonry wall building that's wood framing that has significant intact historic plaster on the interior. And we made several changes during the construction of that Woodard Tunnel process to make sure these materials were properly protected and the construction was properly monitored, well in excess of the requirements of the building department. That said, I urge you to consider the overall impact on the block, the neighborhood, and the impact on this historic resource and vote no on the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hirschberg. Questions? I actually have a question. I don't know if you would be aware of whether there was damage during the construction of the water tunnel.
There was not. We had extensive monitoring both with our office, with Old Structures Engineering, as well as the engineers that were working for the tunnel. What prompted additional investigation, they were a few spikes in the seismograph that we were concerned with, and their engineers were concerned with as well. And it involved going back a little bit and reworking the plan to make sure we were using the utmost care. And at that point, there was no damage to the building.
And would you have access to what the monitoring plan was that was used during the DEP tunnel construction?
Yes.
If you would feel comfortable submitting that for the record, I think that that could be helpful. The other question that I had is you mentioned the context to the east and to the south of the site. How would you describe that context?
The context is much lower in scale. It's more in keeping with the proportions of the Merchants House Museum.
Other questions from Mr. Hirschberg? Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker in opposition is Michael Devonshire.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, thank you for this opportunity to testify in opposition. I think first I need to actually, unfortunately, contradict my staff member who was not working for our firm at the time. We are the architects for the Merchants House Museum. We've been there since 1990. The Merchants House, as you know, is an interior and exterior individual landmark that was designated in the 1970s, long before the NoHo Historic District extension. In any case, when the water tunnel air shafts were constructed, in fact, all of the recognized monitoring systems and protection systems were in place, and in fact, there was damage done to the east wall of the house. If you walk by the house, you can actually see an I-beam that was installed at the instruction of Robert Silman Associates structural engineers, and there was nearly $1 million damage done to the house, and it was closed for almost a year in order to do rectified construction. In any case, my remarks are intended to address the adverse effect that the construction will have on the building. Not structurally. Justin Spivey, one of our colleagues, will address the structural issues, but we deal mostly with the architectural finishes. We have had a condition assessment done. Our office essentially led a team doing a condition assessment of the building that included Robert Zillman Associates, structural engineers, and David Flaherty, a plaster expert who's done work at the U.S. Capitol and at the White House. And we established the need for a stabilization effort at the Merchants House in order to essentially ensure that the vibration, not just from the excavation, but the actual construction of a tall building next to the Merchants House Museum would not have an adverse effect on it. As I said, in spite of the fact that we had monitors on the east wall, there was damage, and I sincerely believe that in spite of the fact that there will be monitors on the west side, there will be damage to the architectural finishes of the Merchants House Museum. Once the monitor detects exceeding vibration, the damage is done. And David Flaherty has pointed that out in his report. In any case, we had bids taken for what the stabilization effort would cost for the Merchants House in order to ensure that there would be no damage. The stabilization effort will cost $1 million, nearly twice the annual income of the Merchants House Museum.
Thank you, Mr. Devonshire.
Welcome.
Questions? Yes, Commissioner Efron.
Thank you. Do you believe that there can be a stabilization effort that would make it possible to construct next door? I'm just trying to understand what the conclusion is.
There are never assurances, complete assurances, because we don't know what the extent of vibration is going to be. And so what we can do is make that stabilization effort, which will cost over $1 million. If in some situation it fails, then we're looking at more cost and more adverse effect for the house. And the real issue is that once those original finishes are gone, you no longer have original finishes. You can replace them as much as you want, but we have historic artifacts. This is an artifact just like a Stradivarius violin. You can recreate it. It's not the same thing.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Levin.
Mr. Devonshire, I have a question that I have a feeling is not going to be one for you to answer, but can somebody, you, or maybe a subsequent speaker, if one is signed up to speak, explain the relationship between the Merchant House Museum and the City of New York, which I believe owns the house?
Yes, they do. John Krawchuk from the Historic House Trust will address these issues.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Our next speaker in opposition is Dennis McAveney.
I'm Dennis McAvina. I am a...
Apologies, the hardest part of this job is pronouncing names.
You did fine. I am a 6-year volunteer docent at the Merchants House. I'm also an interior designer. And I really applaud what Mr. Devonshire just said about once it's gone, it's gone. There are no guarantees. And what the opportunity that I have had over the years as a volunteer, I'm there every Saturday. And not only do we have visitors from the United States and the local neighborhood, we have international visitors who look at that house, they walk through, and they are immediately taken into another era. And when they leave, they remark, this truly represents New York City. This is a touchstone for all the other historical areas in our city. I moved here 7 years ago from the Midwest. I went to the Merchants House because as a visitor, I'd always gone to the Met and all the other wonderful museums. But as an interior designer, when I go to the Met and I look at a period room installation, I almost feel like I'm looking in 2 dimensions. Everything is perfect, everything matches. But unlike that, when you go into the Merchants House, you are literally swept into the early 19th century, which gives all visitors, local, national, and international, a true experience of what life was like during that time period and about the merchants, the maritime people that actually helped build the early part of New York City. I know that my presentation is a little more heartfelt, but seeing the visitors every weekend is amazing, and how many congratulations we get. And when we tell them what is possibly going to happen next door, they are appalled. They cannot understand how something like this would take place in New York City. So I thank you all for the jobs that you do. We really, really appreciate it, and I hope that you will take heed and listen to what all of us are saying today about this diamond in our city. Any questions?
Thank you, and I will assure you that we welcome presentations, both technical and heartfelt.
Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you. We will now turn to speakers in favor, although I will note that this is written as in favor with conditions. John Krawczyk.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. I'd like to start my testimony. I'm John Krawczyk, Executive Director of the Historic House Trust. I'd like to start my testimony by clarifying that I'm neither in opposition or in favor, but there wasn't a box to check for other. And so the receptionist tried to explain this to me, but my testimony kind of falls in the middle. I wish to just sort of state our position, and so with that, I'll give you my testimony. So I'm Executive Director of the Historic House Trust, and we're a nonprofit 501c3 organization in partnership with the New York City Parks Department. So as Mr. Devonshire had stated earlier, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about the relationship with parks as part of my testimony today. We help to advocate for, promote, and provide expertise for 23 historic houses that are all in parkland. They're all publicly owned house museums. And so we work very closely in partnership with the Parks Department. Our main offices, we've been around for close to 30 years, and our offices are actually in the Arsenal, the main headquarters for the Parks Department. In our role, we provide expertise to our member house sites, the Merchants House being one of them, in the form of technical assistance and best practices and solutions for very remarkable historic house museums. And we provide guidance on maintenance, preservation initiatives, collections management, etc. And I'm here today to testify in this capacity in support of preserving and protecting the Merchants House, a fragile and significant landmark that you've heard a lot about already today. And I wish to comment on the application before you for 27 East 4th Street. The Historic House Trust wishes to share our deep concerns about the proposed construction of this hotel and to implore the Planning Commission to take action to protect this significant historic resource. We have identified some errors in the application and the documents in the EAS, which were mentioned by the first speaker today. And so I'll be covering that in a moment, that we feel are very important in understanding this submission. We feel that it's incomplete, lacking some information, and that the true impacts of the proposed construction on the Merchants House, as well as the garden and the adjacent city-owned lot, which is a DEP-owned site, that there are concerns about this development, and I wish to note the following. The LPC DOB technical policy that's been discussed earlier as part of protecting this important historic landmark. It's procedural notice 10/88, which dates to 1988, outlines sort of generic protections for historic landmarks. It's a kind of broad brush spectrum for historic building types, and it doesn't really address the special needs of the Merchants House. And so that's something that really needs to be understood because it has very important and fragile interiors and collections.
Mr. Krawczyk, I'm afraid your time is up, but if you would stay for questions. Sure. You noted that your offices are in the castle. We very much like our meeting room here in a historic building, but I think you may have us beat with that gem of a building and its location. You mentioned that you oversee or are involved with 23 different houses. Have you been involved in a situation where there has been new construction or demolition and construction adjacent to any of the other houses?
This house is particularly unique in that it really abuts lot lines. And so most of our houses are surrounded by a little bit of parkland. So this one is quite unique within our collection. But yes, our houses have sustained damage. King Manor in Queens sustained damage from path work that was done in the park just through the vibrations of removing the paths, plaster cracked. Sometimes these things definitely will occur. And I can tell you that my own experience, I've worked for the Parks Department for 22 years, so I've been a longtime civil servant and have worked with these houses for that entire time. They are very fragile resources that are often subject to damage when construction happens adjacent.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Levin.
Yes, I have a whole lot of questions, but maybe continuing on that line of thought. Do you have an opinion about whether a protection plan can be developed, assume all the goodwill and all the engagement by all the necessary parties? Is it possible that there's a protection plan that will be sufficient for the Merchants House Museum, or are we in a position where we shouldn't even contemplate filling this hole?
So it's the opinion of the Historic House Trust. We have a large board and advisory, a group of advisory members of our board that come from all sorts of backgrounds that help advise us on projects. And in consultation with the Parks Department, it is our feeling that the house is very much at risk from construction, adjacent construction, and that we wish for this resource to be protected. The conditions need to be thoroughly understood. We believe they are not at this moment. That requires a study, a very thorough condition study, which has not been performed. That costs money. This is a city-owned resource, and the city could allocate funds for it, but there's a lengthy procurement process that comes along with using city-allocated funds, as well as a requirement for remediation, should remediation be recommended, that capital funds be assigned to this house to do shoring of plaster work, anything that, moving the furniture out, all of these at great expense, as noted by Mr. Devonshire earlier, could potentially cost over $1 million. And if you're talking city dollars, publicly bid work, it would probably greatly exceed $1 million. But the first step is to really understand the conditions of the house, do a thorough condition study with experts that really understand plaster, the construction of this house, the collections, all of those things would need to be thoroughly vetted by a team of experts, structural engineers, pull up floorboards, really examine the condition of the house so that we would know potentially what to expect. And as stated earlier, the goal would not to be to do monitoring and have damage and correct it later. The goal would be to understand the conditions, do remedial repairs on the house to ensure that it could survive a construction project, and then understand the greater impacts, such as closing the house museum and not having it available, et cetera. There would be an impact from this project on the house.
Okay, well, but part of the fragility of this house, it comes from the fact that it is now the last tooth left in what was a long row of houses that were holding each other up. So that is, a unique feature that whoever the owner of this house has to deal with. And it just happens to be that it's owned by the city, but in this case, seems to me the city has responsibilities for the safety and security of this house, no different from any individual property owner.
Right, and the city acknowledges that this is their property and that they have a responsibility to keep it in good repair, which we do. But we generally don't have a major construction project right adjacent to a party wall, and so that is really what differentiates this project from just an average condition issue that may service that we might be able to address through our own in-house Parks Department forces or through a capital contract. And certainly that could be a path, but procurement process in general takes up to 45 months once you have the monies in place. And most of our projects are funded by elected officials at the Parks Department, so the monies would have to be secured likely through elected officials before proceeding with a design contract and then a construction contract.
Unfortunately, that probably goes beyond the limited scope of our purview here. I mean, these are really issues that were addressed by the Landmarks Commission in setting the shape of this building, and we're just here to deal with two narrow zoning issues. That is, what can happen on the ground floor and that little change in the street wall. But I appreciate that this is a public opportunity to talk about these things. We as a commission have a limited ability to do anything about these things.
And if I may just comment on your comment just very quickly, that when the Landmarks Commission approved the project, they really did not have the benefit of a thorough study. So they really were just approving the appropriateness of the design. That's what the commission's mandate was. And so they have come up with the design, and now the EAS process thoroughly more investigates what the impacts to historic resources are, and I think that's probably why we're all here to understand those.
Could I just ask one more question? Could you describe to us the relationship between the city as owner of the property and the folks who are running the museum? Is that a separate entity? And what's the nature of the arrangement between the city as owner and the museum?
Sure. So the city of New York came into ownership of this property in 2001. It came as a part of a bequest from Brooke Astor, who was closing her foundation and gave $1 million endowment to the house. And so what was so great about that is then the house, after being a house museum for many years, finally became a public resource, which was great. But it's been serving the public as a museum since the 1930s. So once that happened, the city has invested actually money in the house since then. As part of taking on the ownership of historic houses by the city, and in this case under the jurisdiction of the Parks Department, we often partner with nonprofit organizations. In fact, almost 19 of our 23 houses have similar arrangements. They have their own director, their own board of directors. They raise their own money to run the programs in the house. And the license agreement, which they have in order to use the property, it's like a lease, the city's version of a lease, allows them to perform those duties and serve their mission. And so that is the agreement that is in place with the Merchants House Association, and that agreement has been in place since about 2001.
Okay, and so are they responsible for any of these capital issues that we're talking about here today, or is that the city?
No. Generally, the way that the license agreement is written is that the city has responsibility for the property they own, the fixed asset. So the building, the grounds, the maintenance is largely under the responsibility and purview of the city, and the Historic House Trust, my organization, helps to facilitate that.
Helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions I can answer?
Thank you, Mr. Krawczyk.
Thank you.
I note that we have been joined by Assemblymember Deborah Glick, and I would ask her now to testify. And we'll note that we extend a courtesy to elected officials that they can testify at whatever length they wish. They are not limited to the 3 minutes.
That's most kind, but I will try not to intrude more than that. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you on this particular item on 27 East 4th Street. The application for that lot contains the one-story structure and is, as you know, right next to the Merchant House Museum. While it is a difficult and complicated ULURP, it is an example of exactly why the City Planning Commission must exact very exacting standards and understand the needs of the community and the surrounding buildings when New York City is faced with the potential loss of a historic structure. The application has a long history in the community, and it can be traced back to the construction of the row houses along East 4th Street in the early 19th century that would be eventually occupied by the Treadwell family until the 1930s. And despite the applicant receiving a certificate of appropriateness from the City Landmarks Commission for the lot, it still requires your approval through a full ULURP. And this application is emblematic of allowing development even when at the expense of failing to protect public assets, which could result in the loss of a historic building. The Merchant's House is not only designated simply because of the facade, but rather the entire nature, its inside and outside of the building, and it tells the story of this city. And I recommend strongly that you deny this application. While I'm in favor of applicants pursuing the legal route of a special permit and the ULURP process for construction in special districts, this particular application is so far out of context of the local zoning and essentially amounts to spot rezoning in the middle of a block solely to obviate the constraints of constructing in a historic district, and that should not be approved. As it's been stated, I'm sure, the Merchant's House was notably included in the first 20 buildings that were individually designated when the Landmarks Preservation Commission was created in the 60s. Furthermore, Merchant House Museum was one of the first and remains one of only a few buildings in New York City where the interiors are designated and granted historic protection. Not surprisingly, the museum is also a National Historic Landmark and is considered one of the finest examples of federal-style architecture from the 1830s and a historic depiction of life from the early to the mid-19th century. Due to the immediate proximity of such a historic depiction of New York City, we cannot divorce the museum's existence from the evaluation of this ULURP. Any development that would occur on the adjoining lot would need the strictest oversight and be curtailed in a way that favors the preservation of the museum as a public asset and that we hope will exist for generations to come. The Merchant House has been threatened by development before. While the building is currently the only remaining row house on the lot, when it was originally constructed, it would have been one of many that had adjoining party walls which helped support and protect the buildings as a whole. In the 1940s, the structure in the lot currently seeking development was demolished, and the one-story structure was constructed. In 1988, 3 remaining row houses to the east were demolished by a developer who intended to build a residential building in their place. And while manual demolition was promised, that developer demolished the buildings without a permit and used a bulldozer and other equipment, which severely damaged the museum's structure. Repairs cost the museum over $1 million and closed it for 3 years. In 2005, those still undeveloped lots were transferred to the city for construction of the water tunnel project and will eventually be developed as parkland. Similarly, in 1999, the museum itself was deeded to the city and is part of the Historic House Trust operated by the Parks Department. During the ULURP review process, a number of community members attended the hearing and regarding the specifics, and it became clear that while Merchant House and the developers tried to have a conversation regarding concern of the stress that construction would place on the building, it seemed to be a one-way conversation. The Merchant House hired an outside architect, engineering firm, and land use attorney to evaluate the structural needs of the building and to what extent construction would make it possible for the structure to survive. And it was determined that the existing structure could not survive beyond a 1/8 inch shift in the western wall without significant damage to the facade, the interior structure, historic plaster moldings, roof structure, and foundational elements. The engineer discussed the lateral stress nearly a 100-foot structure would have on the existing building. And putting aside the effects of the construction, the new larger structure would essentially lean against the museum and potentially lead to its destruction. Furthermore, it was revealed as part of the community input process that the applicant owns a number of lots in this neighborhood, and specifically owns a larger lot within Community Board 2 at 403 Lafayette Street. This is located around the corner from the lot under review, and is by many standards a better opportunity for the applicant. This lot is located on a wider street and is situated between two larger structures. Certainly, Borough President Gail Brewer has recommended that the applicant make every reasonable effort to develop that lot rather than the one on East 4th Street. In conclusion, it's unacceptable that despite landmark status, buildings cannot assume that they will be properly protected from rampant development by the city administration. It seems like there is at least one active construction site on every block, making it harder for us to breathe. And while many of these contractors are very responsible, we have seen in my community many instances where cranes break, scaffolds fall, facades crumble, and many adjacent properties have been damaged, causing people to have to flee their home on short notice. We cannot rely on the Department of Buildings' issuance of a permit as a guarantee that construction is taking place in the most appropriate way, especially in the context of the particular vulnerability of this site. Nor can we always assume that the ULURP process and issuance of special permits will ensure the protection of a public asset. As such, small, older buildings are particularly vulnerable as they are less likely to have the same resources as a major new development and are particularly vulnerable to vibration and other impacts, and their underpinning undermined. Developers must be forced to implement and comply with the highest standards to protect these structures and ensure construction mitigations in historic districts. And even with the assurances from the applicant, as they have been sometimes in the past, that they will adhere to protective demolition and construction processes, it is evident that there's been little effort made to that effect. And despite that they're pursuing this application since 2014. We are losing much of what makes New York unique and what defines our history, and one hopes that this will not be further exacerbated by the loss of Merchant House. And I ask that you deny this application, and I greatly appreciate your forbearance in the time allotted.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We will now resume with speakers in opposition. Grace Markman.
Hello, my name is Grace Markman. I work with my community in Park Slope in City Council District 39, and we have been through zoning issues, as you may know. And I'm also a docent at Merchant's House, and I've been doing that for the past 10 years. And in addition, I've had a developer on my property line, and I had a historic home in Park Slope, and I went through that for 3 years. A difficult process, to say the least. If development proceeds as these developers propose, Merchant's House will be no more as we know it today. We lose a vital part of our history as a world-class city. The museum holds nearly 100 years of city history. One family just hung on and hung on and hung on, and that's why we have it. The Treadwells did their job. It's time for us to do our job here to protect this treasure. When damage is done, it's done. This is not replaceable. This treasure is not coming back. We owe it to our city. We owe it to our national life and also our international life, as a previous speaker spoke. So I suggest you have been listening carefully, and I appreciate that. We all appreciate that. And I'm grateful for that careful listening that you're doing just right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Markman. Any questions? Our next speaker in opposition is Simeon Banhoft.
Good morning, Commissioners. Simeon Bankoff, Historic Districts Council, HDC, is the citywide advocate for New York's historic places, buildings, and neighborhoods. Much of what I had written has already been said before, so I will amend my statement. Although the proposal in front of us seems like a small thing that's a minor proposal within the scope of a larger project, the larger project flies against decades of municipal planning and cannot be permitted. As earlier mentioned, the Merchants House Museum is one of the first built properties designated as a landmark in 1965, and the first one in Manhattan. In 1981, the city took the further step to designate its interiors as a rare interior landmark, and in 1999, the city stepped in and bought the property in order to ensure its continued survival. Finally, in 2008, the city extended the NoHo Historic District to its neighboring site, specifically to ensure the Merchants House was protected against damaging proposals by the highest level of regulation. The Historic Districts Council was a great part of that, and we're happy to partner with then Councilmember Rosie Mendez on that specific issue. This is the moment decades of planning have been guarding against. The proposal before the Commission might seem small and even reasonable when viewed devoid of its context, but it is impossible to view this project as such. Experts agree that the potential damage that this project can inflict on the Merchants House might be catastrophic. To our understanding, there is no adequate protection possible that can be assured to prevent profound damage to this public resource. The City of New York has consistently acted for more than 50 years to protect this irreplaceable public property. Now it's the time to activate the real protections which the city has put into place and to not deny this permit. I'd like to just take a second of my remaining time and say that, as my colleague John Krawczyk mentioned, OPPN 1088, the Buildings Department, does not specifically talk about interior landmarks. This is a very rare instance where the property that is particularly endangered has been designated by New York City as being of a special interest, and therefore it's warranted to really take that extra look. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Questions? No? Thank you very much. Next speaker is Margaret Gardner.
Hello, all. My name is Margaret Gardner, and I'm really known as Pi. And I've been executive director of the Merchants House Museum for 28 years. And what that means is that I know this house very, very well in my bones. I'm not going to speak to the legalities of zoning or the nuances of engineering leaps of faith. I'm just going to tell you a couple of things that I know of my experience at the house over 28 years. The first thing I know, and everybody has said it, is that the importance of the Merchants House in the history of the city of New York cannot be overstated. There is nowhere else in this city. One family lived there for almost 100 years. It was turned into a museum in 1936 after the last family member died, and it was preserved with all of their possessions, the Treadwell family, Seabury and Eliza, and 8 children. We have their furniture. We have household objects. We have photographs. We even have their clothes. 3,000 items are in our collection, all original. Also, as people have said, it has every landmark designation known to man, National Historic Landmark. It was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. In New York City, it was the first building in Manhattan designated at the very first meeting of the Landmarks Preservation Commission. 1981, it was designated an interior landmark. There are only 119 in our city, and we're one of only 6 residences. So it's important, we know that. The other thing I know in my bones, in my heart, and this is one of those heartfelt, impassioned pleas, I know that the house, how fragile the house is. It's 186 years old. It was built in 1832 on a foundation of rubble. It was built, as mentioned, as a row house. And everybody, holding each other up. In the 1940s, 1946, its wingman to the west was demolished, and the one-story garage under question was constructed. Our institutional archives report the damage that was done in the 1940s from that demolition. Fast forward to 1988, when the buildings to the east were demolished, and they were supposed to, there was an agreement with landmarks, everybody's involved, that the building was to be taken brick by brick. And that's not what happened. It was bulldozed. I was there then, and it caused $1 million worth of damage. We were closed off and on for 2.5 years. The house became like a house of cards with the walls falling out and away from each other. There was a crack so large in the southwest corner that you could see daylight. I could put my hand through that crack. The history of damage to this house is very, very long. The water tunnel was another instance, and there was our original plaster walls, plaster ceilings. The ornamental plaster is considered the finest surviving of the period. How could you do that? The risk is not.
I'm sorry, Ms.
You. Right. It's not worth the risk, guys. How can we do this? Any questions?
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Gardner? And I do want to thank you for the very personal and historical tour through it. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Our next speaker in opposition is Michael Hiller.
Good morning. My name is Michael Hiller of Hiller PC. We represent the Merchants House and a coalition of New Yorkers who stand in opposition to the application. The grounds upon which we oppose the application are set forth in our electronic submission submitted this morning. I intend to just address a few highlights, although I should emphasize that with 3 minutes, it's very difficult to respond to everything that has been said. I will say at the outset that I'm a preservationist lawyer. I've devoted my life to this, and whenever I travel, I look to preserve properties, and I investigate other jurisdictions to see how they preserve properties. I have never seen another property like this one anywhere. It's the only one of its kind in the world. So we have a great deal at stake here when we talk about this house. This application has received universal opposition from public officials who have studied the issue, including the Manhattan Borough President, City Council members Carlina Rivera and Corey Johnson, State Senator Brad Hoylman, State Assembly Member Glick, who is here today, House of Representatives Member Carolyn Maloney, the Land Use Subcommittee of Community Board 2, and Community Board 2, which unanimously rejected the application. Mr. Spindler's comment that there was at one point an approval of that application is incorrect. In addition, Historic Districts Council, Greenwich Village Society of Historic Preservation, Municipal Art Society, I could go on, but I only have 3 minutes. It's been universally rejected for very important reasons. First and foremost, this is illegal spot zoning. The developer did identify another property at 53 Great Jones Street, but if you look at the EAS, you will see that that property cannot possibly utilize this amendment that they are proposing. This would be a singular amendment that would only support the applicant, and that is illegal in New York. In addition, as you've heard already, there is substantial evidence that the proposed construction would do catastrophic damage to the building, both on its outside and on its interior. I heard Mr. Spindler say that he's being stonewalled in a dialogue between the museum and the developers. I can assure you that is not true. From June 19th to June 26th, I exchanged correspondence with Mr. Kandreva 7 times, the last of which I opened up on my phone, and of course I've now. Here it is. He thanked me, and he said he looked forward to seeing if we can make progress on resolving open issues. I will contact my client regarding the meeting request. So clearly, we have not stonewalled anyone. It's simply that the problems are insurmountable based upon the application. One thing you heard that the museum would be closed for a period of time. It would, based upon the estimates of our professionals, and we're talking about eminent people. Michael Devonshire, who has been a preservationist architect for his career, is a member of the Landmarks Preservation Commission and has intimate knowledge of this particular building, having worked with it since 1990. The building would be closed for close to a year, at least a year, and the work would cost. How terrible that you interrupted me too. I'm glad to answer any questions that you may have.
I hope that people are cursing the bell and not the commission.
Absolutely not.
Any questions for Mr. Hiller? Yes, Commissioner Ifan.
Mr. Hiller, is there any construction or capital estimate for any remediation that would need to take place in the museum to make it more resilient?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking it. What we have been told by the design professionals and the engineering professionals is that what would need to be done on the interior of the house in order to preserve it, assuming that everything worked out perfectly and the vibrations didn't exceed limits and the soil depression underneath the foundation did not go to the depth that it's been projected to. What would have to happen is all the plaster on the interior of the building would have to be lathered with this special protective foam. Interior structural columns would have to be installed. The floorboards would have to be lifted up, and everything inside the merchant's house would have to be removed. The cost of just removing the materials and storing them would be $1 million. Then we also have the protective measures that would be necessary, and then finally, of course, there would be the lost revenue. So the actual overall cost is closer to $2 million, not $1 million. And insofar as the work that would be necessary, I must emphasize to you that based upon what we have heard, the particular project that has been proposed that this commission is considering is simply not susceptible to the assurances that would be necessary to make these protective measures closer to certain. It's just not going to happen.
Well, I appreciate that, and it's useful information. The real question I'm asking is what the capital needs are of the museum, assuming there was no construction going on, to bring it to a state of good repair, which is, I think, where my fellow commissioner was heading before.
My apologies. That's a great question. Also, I'm sorry I didn't understand it the first time I heard it. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm hopeful that someone from the Merchant's House can give you an answer concerning the capital needs without this project.
Thank you. Commissioner Levin, I'm sorry.
Were all of these arguments made to the Landmarks Preservation Commission back in 2014 when they allowed demolition of the garage and were open to issuing the certificate of appropriateness, which I guess didn't get issued until 2018, but nonetheless.
The arguments that were made before the commission, I should say the issues that were presented to the commission focused principally on design and appearance and not on the structural issues, which the commissioners, as I understand it, were instructed by general counsel to the commission were not relevant to its determination. I share the reaction that you have, but that is the information I've received from the LPC, and I wish it had been addressed. But I would say that the EAS gives this commission the opportunity to address these issues as is required by your jurisdiction. So you do have the opportunity to address it here, and I hope you do.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Levin.
It's not so much a question as a comment, and that is about this, since as you are a lawyer, it's perhaps appropriate to address this to you. The number of speakers, and you in particular, have made a point about spot zoning. But this commission a number of times has amended the text to allow a similar situation to happen. I was on the commission at the time we did it for 150 Worcester and 300 Lafayette. Mr. Kondreva indicated there had been some previous similar amendments. We need to consider what's being asked here. It's not a traditional spot zoning. It is the kind of thing we have done before. We will need to look at it carefully in this case, but I think it's a little too strong to call it spot zoning.
I don't want to engage in disagreement with you, but I will simply say that having done the research on it, what I see this circumstance as being is an application that would singularly benefit one property rather than a comprehensive or even a partially comprehensive plan that is focused on the public's benefit. But I understand your point.
That was the case in the other two as well.
I would just, yes.
And clearly something we can address in post-hearing follow-up. Thank you, Mr. Heller.
Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Giorgio Bovenzi.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I'm Giorgio Bovenzi. I'm a member of Community 2 and also a resident of the neighboring building, 25 East of 4th. So I will later on also address a couple of questions that have been raised regarding the situation at 25 East 4th. The first thing I wanted to say here is that one of the key aspects that distinguish human beings from the rest of animal kingdom is our ability to have a sense of history. And the Merchants House Museum is part of our history. Hotel development is not. And it's just as simple as that. It is unquestionable and admitted by the developers themselves that the proposed hotel development will damage the Merchants House Museum. The issue is how much damage. That's where our views probably differ. But there is going to be damage. And also unquestionable is that the investment that New York City has made into preserving the Merchants House through public money will be gone as a result of any damage to the Merchants House. And as a result, it is unquestionable that a piece of history, possibly the entire historical legacy of this incredible house, will be gone forever if the proposed development is allowed to proceed. And there is a public outcry, I can tell you, against the proposed development. Put simply, the risk is too high and there is no bond, there is no commitment that can cover that risk. And as a commission that looks after the public interest that may be endangered by proposed development, I respectfully submit that there are few public interests that are more important than the protection of such an important historical New York City site. And importantly, the protection also of the investment that New York City has made over the years into the Merchants House using public money. Addressing some questions raised before about the windows, the lot line windows at the neighboring 25 East 4th site. Those windows have been there for a very long time. We have evidence and pictures that at least they date as far back as the 60s, but there are also older pictures from probably 1910, 1920. The date of those pictures is not entirely certain. That also show those pictures as already, those windows as already there. And many of those windows provide ventilation and fire exit to bedrooms at this time. And they were DOB approved as windows serving bedrooms. So all those bedrooms are legal. Thank you so much for your attention.
Benzi. Questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Emily Hill-Wright.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm the Communications and Programs Manager at the Merchants House Museum, and I'd like to speak very briefly today about the scope of public opposition to this project. I know we've already heard lots of people speaking in opposition. But since the developer submitted the application in the spring, roughly 1,500 museum visitors have signed or written letters of opposition. I'd like to submit these letters to the Commission today. Included in this stack of 1,500 are letters from all 5 boroughs, from 38 states, and from 24 countries. Many visitors have included personal notes describing how important the Merchants House is to them. Personally, I've worked there for 6 years now, and the museum is unlike anything else. I gave a tour just yesterday, and at the end of the tour, upon hearing that there was a proposed development next door, one woman on the tour actually came close to tears and said, "But this place is so special." Additionally, another 1,100 individuals have submitted letters of opposition to the City Planning Commission online. Also submitted are letters from preservation and neighborhood organizations, including the Municipal Arts Society, the Preservation League of New York State, the NoHo Bowery stakeholders, the East 4th Street and East 5th Street block associations, among others. Finally, an online petition at change.org has received 5,200 signatures from all over the world. I urge the City Planning Commission to follow the recommendations of Community Board 2 and the Manhattan Borough President and reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hillwright. If you would give that to the secretary, it can be entered into the record. Questions? Thank you. Our next speaker in opposition is Roberta Belulovich.
Good afternoon, and thank you. My name, beautifully pronounced, is Roberta Belulovich, you go. And I have been involved with the Merchants House Museum in various capacities since the 1980s. Right now, I am there weekends, Saturdays and Sundays, and I see visitors from all the boroughs, from all the states, and literally from all over the world. I see thousands of people go through the Merchants House every year. What they say, especially the international visitors, who are very important to New York, as we all know, tourism is a big resource for New York. I have never heard anyone say anything but this. How could this happen? This could not happen in our country. How can it happen here? New York is the capital of the world. And I have no answer for them, because how could it happen? I do not see that. People have said more than once that the Merchants House Museum is irreplaceable. That is the definition of the word priceless. The Merchants House Museum is priceless. It has no price. Nothing in it can be replaced in any way, shape, or form. It would completely lose its significance, and there is no doubt that damage would be sustained. And that is really my point. I urge you, along with everyone else, to please reject this proposal as being completely untenable in any way, shape, or form. And I thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions? Thanks. Our next speaker is Mary Kay Hall.
Good afternoon. Thank you for listening to all of us. I became so close to the Merchants House Museum beginning in 1974. I have been chairman of the board for many, many years until I had to move to Paris for business for 10 years. And so I did not continue. I couldn't really be a good director and not be here. Since I have been back, I am back on the board. I have over the years done some legal work. I am a lawyer, although I am now retired. And the house is such an important part of my life. And knowing Pi and working with Pi all these years and other board members, it's just been a major part of my life. And all I want to say is that, because I can't really say anything more than people have already been saying this afternoon, except how important this house and its contents are to this city and to everyone who's here. I mean, it is just completely unique. And I urge you to not approve this application. The risk is just too great. I sat here this afternoon and I listened to all the work that was being done to protect the house and these kinds of studies and those kinds of studies and commitments that they'll do everything they can to make sure that nothing happens. But there is a huge risk, and the result is devastating. And the risk is just too great. Please, do not approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Yes, Commissioner Dweck. Ms. Hall?
Question.
If you wouldn't mind answering a question from Commissioner Dweck.
Thank you. Given your extensive history with the association with the Merchants House, do you know if there were any past discussions to acquire the property next door from the neighbor? And have you engaged in such?
I think that we have considered we would be very happy to acquire the lot and use it for museum purposes. We have discussed that to some extent.
Have you had a discussion with the owner, with the applicant?
I don't. I'd have to ask Pi on that because I'm not sure.
That might be
but it's something that we have discussed internally and said it would be great if we could just take over that lot, and we could use it. We could use it for services, for meetings. The house really isn't all that big. But thank you for raising it, because I know it's something we have discussed.
Another option.
But lately, we've just been so focused on what's going on with it now.
It might be a worthwhile option to pursue.
I think we're very interested in pursuing it, but we got to get rid of these people first.
And given your level of...
I mean, we can't do anything until we get rid of these people.
And given your level of public support, I'd imagine that it might be amenable to the city to help. So I would pursue that option.
Yeah, I mean, we could do a lot of good things with that lot and save the house. But we got to get rid of those people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Justin Spivey.
So thank you all for your continued attention and for correctly pronouncing my last name. So I, with WJE Engineers and Architects, and we're representing the Merchants House Museum, and we've also made previous comments on the record on behalf of 25 East 4th Street through a joint representation agreement. We were engaged as a consultant to evaluate the risk of damage due to adjacent construction. And those risks include not only the ground movement and vibration that you've heard so much about, but also smaller issues, everything from water management to tools dropped from scaffolding, which are still risks to the Merchants House Museum. So anticipating a question that Commissioner Levin has asked others, we can continue to work with the developer's consultants as they continue to revise their protection plan. But nobody can guarantee anyone's diligence in following that plan. And while the protection plan can limit the risk of damage, it can't eliminate it. We cannot prevent damage from happening. We can only control the risk. So I wanted to join some other speakers who have provided some context on TPPN 1088, which has been cited several times. I just wanted to emphasize that the research on which that notice is based makes it clear that the criteria apply to typical historic structures in typical condition. And the Merchants House Museum is exceptional on both of those counts. Our concerns about the irreplaceable plaster finishes in the building are shared with many, many others and well documented in our correspondence on this project. So I won't go into detail on that. But I did want to respond to the applicant's statement about the underpinning of adjacent buildings. And while it's technically correct that they will not be underpinning adjacent buildings according to their current plan, they are underpinning the walls of the existing garage building beneath 25 East 4th Street. And that's visible in the section, the building section that you were shown during the applicant's presentation. They're also proposing to underpin the walls of the existing garage adjacent to the garden wall of the Merchants House. And in both cases, there is a risk of soil loss from beneath those adjacent structures. Even though the structure being underpinned is the existing garage, there's a risk of soil loss from behind it. And even if carefully executed, there are still risks there. But the most significant unresolved discrepancy or unresolved issue here is a discrepancy in the predicted settlement of the foundation beneath the new building. That's a geotechnical issue. That's not our purview, so we haven't evaluated it. We also haven't evaluated the recent change in the protection plan to an auger piled.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Spivey? Yes, Commissioner Efron.
Thank you for the clarification. Have you been involved in representing any owners, either new construction or of row houses from the mid-1800s, where you've seen a successful demolition with no damage to a building?
Not early 19th century, but late 19th and early 20th. And while our favorite projects are the ones where we can be involved in a proactive way and prevent damage or limit the risk of damage, from my earlier point, It's unfortunate that most of my project experience with adjacent construction is with failures that have occurred through lack of planning or through lack of following an established plan.
Meaning that you come into to know about the project after there's a failure, or these are ones where you were involved from the beginning?
Both. We have been involved in the proactive planning phase as well as the reactive post-failure damage investigation phase.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Our next speaker is Tara Duvivier.
Good afternoon, Chair Lager and Commissioners. I'm Tara Duvivier, Urban Planner, here on behalf of Manhattan Borough President Gail A. Brewer to speak in opposition to the zoning text amendment and special permits to facilitate the construction of a new 8-story building at the property located at 27 East 4th Street. In order to satisfy the requirement of the special permit, the applicant must demonstrate to our satisfaction that the proposed development would have minimal adverse effects on conforming uses in the surrounding area. The location of this proposed development in a historic district and adjacent to a beloved and fragile landmark makes this very challenging. The proposed project is adjacent to the Merchants House Museum, as we all know, a historic landmark which is nearly 200 years old. The age of the building, the structural condition, and concern over the impact of the construction of the proposed development could have on the exterior and interior of the museum building must be considered carefully. While the applicant has been working with the museum since 2014 to mitigate any potential damage of its project, if its project were to proceed, there is still no agreement as to whether or not these efforts would be effective or sufficient given the current condition of the building. At the present moment, the museum's building's owner, the Parks Department, has not taken on any capital needs assessment of the building and acknowledges that such an assessment is needed. The borough president believes that before the current application is approved, an independent assessment conducted by an expert in historic properties must be conducted under the auspices of Parks, and the application should not move forward unless a construction plan is developed that has an extremely high probability of success without damage to the museum. However, before those steps are taken, the borough president believes another route may prove advantageous. During a review of this application, it was discovered that the applicant also owns another property within the same zoning lot, 403 Lafayette Street, which has been referred to. Preliminary conversations between this office and the Department of City Planning indicate that a transfer of development rights is possible, depending on what the applicant were to propose on the site. While this office sympathizes with the applicant at the thought of starting over with a new site, this alternative could also prove a benefit to the applicant, as if they would be able to build a larger project. Therefore, the Manhattan Borough President recommends disapproval unless the applicant makes all reasonable efforts to develop the project at 403 Lafayette Street. If the applicant is unable to develop on the alternate site after exhausting all efforts, then the City of New York, through the Department of Parks and Recreation, should obtain an independent expert assessment that should result in a plan to ensure the structural stability of the museum building throughout construction of the project prior to final approval of the application. CPC should also require a restrictive declaration as a condition of the special permits. The restrictive declaration should require the developer to adhere to conditions and safeguards to minimize adverse effects on the adjacent merchant house. The Department of Parks and Recreation should also be responsible for overseeing implementation of the conditions and safeguards to ensure the stability of the museum building as a treasured landmark for generations to come.
Questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dale Vandersand.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. My name is Dale Vandersand. I'm a 19-year volunteer at the museum. I am in opposition of the development as well. I joined 19 years ago, and what grabbed me was the fact that the museum is a living and breathing institution. It's not just a building where you go and see artifacts and beautiful things. I soon became part of the programming committee, which is deeply working with the executive director to work on the constant every month programming that happens, from lectures and various kinds of creative things that we do. And soon after, in 2004, I co-founded a program, a vocal arts group in residence at the museum. So for 14 years, we've been giving concerts of classical and parlor music are historically based in programs specific to thematic things that are 19th century. We perform in the double parlor of the museum, the Greek Revival double parlor, and that's kind of integral to what we're about. We want to present vocal music, which is kind of one of the best ways we can bring back history through our voices, one of the most relevant ways, we believe. And in doing so in the parlor, with the beautiful plasterwork, the Port Doro marbles, the 1848 piano bought by the family that we helped restore with our efforts, we also bring audiences to a non-traditional venue. I just want to give an idea that the museum is alive, that it has a really strong volunteer group. Things are constantly being recreated and built. It's not just about preserving, this as was always, but kind of revisiting it, recreating it, and making it vital to the community. So thank you very much.
You're making me wish that you would use your remaining minute to play one of the recordings that was made there.
Well, please come to one of our concerts.
Any questions for Mr. Van der Sande? Thank you.
Thank you.
So at this point, we've reached the end of the folks who have signed up to testify, but if there is anyone else in the audience who would want to be heard? Yes. And the secretary will ask you to fill out a card so that we have it for the official record.
Thank you. I'm Hilda Regier, and I own a row house, townhouse in the Chelsea Historic District Extension.
Please start the 3-minute clock.
Sorry. I am rising to say something because of damage I experienced from construction next door. And there's been a lot said about potential damage to plaster. Yes, that's very real. But in my instance, fireplaces were damaged. A Portero marble fireplace crashed in my dining room as a result of what was happening in the construction next door. With some effort, I managed to find a near replacement at the demolition depot on 125th Street. But if the fireplaces in the Merchant's House fall, I doubt that they would be as lucky.
Thank you.
So obviously, I think I would join with the majority here in opposing the zoning change that would permit this construction.
Thank you. Questions? Thank you. And I believe I saw another speaker.
Hi, my name is Tim Ranney, and I'm a neighbor of the Merchant's House. I live in a landmark building around the corner, Colonnade Row, which was also one of the first buildings landmarks gave status to. Built the same year as Merchant's House. And last Saturday, I was in my home, and the neighbor upstairs was moving her couch around or something, and a huge chunk of 3-foot original crown molding came crashing down, and it's gone. It's, I doubt the landlord's going to do anything about replacing it. But that's just one example of just, one little tap, and the whole west wall will fall down. The Merchant's House is a oasis for the neighborhood. Its programming is amazing. I go to the garden to read and relax, because Lafayette's pretty busy, so to go off Lafayette and go to East 4th Street and go into that garden is just incredible. I just think people have to realize Landmark's made a mistake by giving the developer the go-ahead. They just need to admit to the fact they made a mistake and deny the application. We can't lose this house. Nobody wants a hotel in the neighborhood anyway. There are plenty of hotels. And, you know, I think the developer should donate the lot to the Merchant's House, build your thing on Lafayette Street, and just let this thing, you know, be the hero here. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Rani? Thank you. Any other speakers who would like to be heard? Then, before closing the hearing, I do want to take note of the number of folks who came forward to testify who are volunteering, and to thank you for the service. I do think that that is one of the hallmarks of our city, that we love our landmarks, we love our nonprofit institutions, and so want to recognize and appreciate your time. And with that, the public hearing is closed.
Borough of Manhattan, calendar number 35, CD 10, N180373HKM. A public hearing in the matter of a communication concerning a landmark designation of the Central Harlem West 130th Street through 132nd Street Historic District.
I will note that for the first time during my tenure on the commission, we have absolutely no speakers registered on this topic. Sorry, Calvin, for your time on this. Right. But I will ask if there is anyone here who has shown up and wants to be heard on this matter. If not, then the world's shortest public hearing is now closed. Wow, in all your years.
Borough of Queens, calendar number 36, CD5, C180138ZMQ, in the matter of an application for a zoning map amendment concerning O'Neill's rezoning.
Our first speaker on behalf of the applicant is Nora Martins.
Good afternoon, Chair Lago, commissioners. I had to change it from good morning to good afternoon. That was impressive. My name is Nora Martins from Ackerman LLP, representing O'Neill's, the applicant for this rezoning. The owner, Danny Powell, will be speaking later, and he can speak more about his family's business and its operations in the neighborhood, but I'll note that O'Neill's restaurant has been an institution in Maspeth for over 80 years. This map, the area map, shows the project area, the proposed rezoning area, which will legalize the existing non-conforming O'Neill's restaurant use and allow a modest enlargement. And it will also rezone several other adjacent parcels to better reflect existing built conditions in the neighborhood, making one property more conforming and other properties with commercial use comply. These photos show the two parcels that are on 53rd Drive that are included within the rezoning area, including on the left, you have O'Neill's restaurant, the existing one-story restaurant, and then to the right, you have the existing four-story overbuilt residential building that's located adjacent to O'Neill's. These photos show existing conditions on 65th Place, including on either side, 3 two-story mixed-use buildings, all of which have non-conforming commercial use on the ground floor. Proposed zoning change map shows the existing R4 zoning, which has been in place since 1961 without change. The right side of the map shows the proposed zoning districts, which have been carefully drawn to reflect existing conditions while not allowing additional development in this low-density neighborhood. The proposed zoning map amendment seeks to change the existing R4 zoning district to, for the applicant site, for the restaurant site, an R5D zoning district with a C22 commercial overlay, and then seeks an R5D zoning district for the adjacent residential property, no commercial overlay on that property. And then for the 6 other parcels included in the rezoning on 65th Place, seeks to map a C22 commercial overlay without changing the underlying R4 zoning district designation. Should the rezoning be approved, O'Neill's proposes to construct a partial second floor addition, approximately 4,335 square feet above the existing restaurant. The addition would house an accessory banquet hall with a maximum of 140 seats. The enlargement will increase the size of the existing restaurant to 12,530 square feet, just under a 1.5 FAR. The proposed building height will be 25 feet, 1 inch. Site plan showing the proposed enlargement towards the front of the building, and also an elevation showing the proposed 2-story building from the street. Community Board 5 and the Queensborough President approved this application. We also have 9 letters in support from neighbors immediately adjacent to the property in the residential building and also across the street, and a petition with over 200 signatures in support of this application, which we'll submit to the commission after the hearing. Thank the commission for their consideration. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Ms. Martins? Yes, Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
You mentioned the community board was in support, but they did have conditions.
Yes.
Could you speak to those conditions? I know with respect to the parking that there were some discussion about potentially arranging for some, agreement around parking, and if there has been any movement on that. And we'll start there, I guess.
Sure. Yes, the community board did have two conditions. One was that the applicant would provide some parking agreements with nearby businesses that could accommodate parking in the event that there are larger events at the facility to accommodate that overflow parking that might be generated by the new space. The applicant has been working hard on that, has been in touch with several businesses in the community. Right now, there's possibility for over 130 spaces at some various locations that are nearby that could accommodate that parking, and he's continuing to work out agreements with those establishments and nearby school.
How confident are you that they'll be able to do that?
And we have some signed letters of agreement, but until the rezoning is approved and the enlargement is built, we're not going to enter into a formal agreement. Okay. But we're quite confident that we can accommodate any additional parking demand.
Okay. And what is the current situation with parking? There were some issues about valet parking in the neighborhood. I mean, they park in the neighborhood, in the residential portion of the neighborhood?
Yes. I mean, the neighborhood is all zoned residentially. There is valet parking. There's no parking on site. I mean, the building was built 8 years ago, and it's full, takes up the full site. There is no on-site parking. The valets do park, and they park street parking where it's legal to park cars, and that's the current situation. That try not to block anyone's driveways and try to be responsive to any concerns. And Danny from O'Neill's can speak more to that. Any concerns that neighbors may have, they do try to be very responsive to and make sure that their valet operations are not interfering with residents.
Okay. Yeah, it would be great for him to speak to that. And then do the residential units in the surrounding neighborhood, do most of them have parking spots? Or no, I'm not familiar with the residential context.
A lot of them, I mean, it is lower density. A lot of them do have driveways and garages. Oh, okay. But there are people that own multiple vehicles, so a lot of residents do park on the street. But there are, it's not multifamily generally.
The building typology includes
driveways
parking.
and
okay, thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Levin.
Yes, I have a question about the maximum development potential that would be created by the change to the rezoning of the O'Neill's site in the building next door. The building next door, is it already overbuilt?
Yes.
So nothing else would happen or could possibly happen there with the zoning change?
Correct. It would still remain slightly overbuilt in the R5D zoning district.
A little less overbuilt.
It would just be much closer to that typology.
Okay. And on the O'Neill site, as I understand it, they're not proposing to build to the full potential, is that correct?
Correct. They're building essentially the maximum enlargement they can build without having to provide parking on site, because it's infeasible to provide parking on site given the existing building conditions. So if this size enlargement, which is just under 4,500 square feet, generates a low enough parking requirement that it can be waived. So this really is the maximum that can be built on the site. Although a 2 FAR is permitted under the R5D C2 too, but they're proposing a 1.49.
Okay. And then on the sites across the street, the ones that will remain in the R4 district but get the commercial overlay, that does not create any additional development potential on those sites?
No, essentially just reflects the existing conditions.
Simply about the ground floor, legalizing the ground floor.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now turn to a speaker in opposition, Derek Sorolowski.
Good afternoon.
My name is Derek Sokolowski. I am speaking on behalf of my parents, Andre and Marzana Sokolowski, that live within 100 feet of the O'Neill's restaurant. I've been a member of the community for the past 25 years. I just left my house maybe a few hours ago, passed by O'Neill's on the Q67 bus, and I'm speaking on opposition of this proposal. For one, the restaurant has been bringing us, sorry, I'm really nervous speaking, has been bringing a lot of issues with parking. Now, thankfully, I'm one of the houses that has a parking spot, but my tenant doesn't. She's a court employee, and she would spend around an hour and a half finding a parking spot within 1 block, then 2 blocks, then 5 blocks, then 10 blocks, and have to carry all her groceries home because the valet parkers at the O'Neill's restaurant clog up the parking so much that we have people going to fist fights over parking, because some people think the parking spot in front of their house is theirs, it's not, but, some people claim it. Also, issues that have come up with the restaurant are, for example, patrons that leave the restaurant are intoxicated, misbehaving, screaming, yelling, inciting violence in the neighborhood, to the point where I have to consider with my parents to increase our insurance on liability for the home from $1 million to $4 million, because nowadays, once the person leaves the restaurant, they can be under anyone's liability, including my home. So that's going to be an issue that I'm going to have to spend money on. Well, not me, my parents are, but that they will have to spend money on in consideration if this proposal goes through. Now, also, there's 140 people coming to this location. You cannot possibly park so many of these cars into our neighborhood. Now, the community board said that there was a resolution to address that. Imagine trying to park cars on the other side of the neighborhood to go to this restaurant. That's not going to work here. You're going to have to expect the valet parkers to walk 20, 30 minutes to go to the parking spots and then have to bring all those cars back to the restaurant. That also brings in traffic, which also impedes on the Q67 bus route that goes right on that corner of that restaurant and causes people to miss time at work, be late for work, and so on and so forth. And that's all I have to say today.
Thank you, Mr. Sokolowski. Questions? Yes, Commissioner Efron.
Have the hours changed? What is bringing about the additional, as you say, possibly intoxicated people?
So on the weekends, it's where I would tell people, don't come to my house. Just don't come to my house because there's a lot of people coming to drink. Sports games, FIFA World Cup is starting right now. People jumping up and down and drinking and whatnot. And the restaurant is becoming more popular because what the representative did not tell you was that the restaurant burned down a few years ago. And once it got rebuilt, its popularity got brought right back. But what the neighbors would tell you is that when the restaurant was burnt down and being rebuilt, the parking was beautiful. There's a lot more available spaces. But to continue answering your question, though, it seems that just a lot more people are coming, not just from the neighborhood, but from out of state, from other boroughs, and it just keeps bringing more and more people. And then, in the middle of the night, I would hear screaming and yelling and, F you and F you here and this, that, and the other, which I'm a teacher. I have to wake up at 8 in the morning and I have to get to school, to college and teach and work and go to work on my master's. And it's just really difficult that they want to bring more people, which will bring more interruptions to our daily life.
Yes, Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi. So how many parking spaces do you have associated with your property?
So comfortably, it would fit 1 car. It could fit 2 cars if you do bumper to bumper, and my car is right up against the garage. Now, to add on to that.
So you have a garage space as well?
I do, but I use it as storage space because we all live in the city and we need to shove our stuff into someplace. So we use that as our storage. Before it was storage, it was used as a playroom for the previous owner that lived in the house.
Okay, so there's a garage space that's used for something else, and then there's a parking space that would fit 2 bumper to bumper, but comfortably.
With a fence sticking out and possibly causing, liability right there. So,
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Sokolowski.
Thank you.
Our next speaker in favor is Dan Pyle.
Hello, how you doing? I'm Danny Pyle. My family's been involved with the O'Neill's restaurant for just over 70 years. I've been there working over 25 years. I feel we've been a staple of the community, a big part of the community. We get involved in everything in Maspeth. We're on the Lions Club, the Kiwanis Club, the Chamber of Commerce. Whatever's good for Maspeth, we get involved in. So, with this gentleman coming out about the parking is rough in the neighborhood. It's rough all over Queens, Ridgewood, Middle Village. I hear it from everybody and people that I work with at the restaurant. And for the one comment that he said about how when we were burnt down for the 2 years or we were rebuilding for the 2 years, we actually had one of the members on the city council who said he lives a block and a half from O'Neill's. And when we had the fire and we were closed, him and his neighbor thought the parking would get really easy. And nothing's changed, quote unquote. They couldn't tell if O'Neill's was opened or if O'Neill's was closed, quote unquote. So, I beg to differ. We have an open door policy at O'Neill's. Like I said, George O'Neill's been in the neighborhood his whole life, his parents, and we're there for the neighborhood. We run a lot of charity events. We get involved, like I said, with the Lions, everybody else. Maspeth Federal's a prominent bank. They do a lot of nice events that we sponsor, get involved in, all the local schools, from putting, banners in youth sports, gymnasiums, and contributing. Everything we do, basically, we contribute to the neighborhood. So we are a part of it, and if anyone has a problem, I tell them to come see me, because I work there just about, 7 days a week. So I'm in communication with the community board. That's why we're going forward with this, this proposal. And, nowadays with Uber, Juno, Lyft, not as many people are coming, with cars. It's a lot easier. We also run a program with Lindy's Car Service, which is in Middle Village, where if you take a taxi to O'Neill's, you'll get a free ride home. So there's not as many vehicles coming through there because of us. It's just the neighborhood and the surrounding neighborhoods. And we have some firm agreements with multiple parking areas that'll park probably close to 150 cars that I don't see we have any problem locking up and, fulfilling that end of the deal. And like I said, I'm a neighborhood guy. The last thing I want to be doing is having problems with my neighbors. We're not a gin mill. We're a family restaurant. We do catering. People aren't leaving our place intoxicated. All right, we do more food than the other 2 restaurants that are on the block. There are a few liquor licenses on this block, but we are the biggest one. So whatever happens up on this corner, we seem to get the label, oh, it must have been from O'Neill's. So unfortunately, it is what it is, but we're more of a restaurant than the other 2 places, and we're looking to do just catering. There's a big need for the catering for the neighborhood, small, affordable catering, and then we're looking to fulfill it and create new jobs, and we hire all kids from the neighborhood.
Thank you, Mr. Pyle. Yes, Commissioner Efron.
Thank you. It's
You're
nice
welcome.
to hear about a neighborhood restaurant. What are the proposed hours for the catering facility?
The catering.
Which days and what
It's
hours?
usually afternoons. Parties are anywhere between noon to 4, or you'll have an evening party will be 6 to 10 or 7 to 11 on weekends.
Does the restaurant stay open later than 11?
The restaurant stays open till 11, and the bar stays open till 2 o'clock Sunday through Thursday, and like 3 o'clock Friday and Saturday, depending if there's anybody in it. So the bartender can close at 2 o'clock if there's nobody there. A lot of times before I go to bed, I go on my camera and I see who's in the bar, and at like 11:30, 12, and I see 6 or 8 people who live walking distance from the place. So it's not a place that he thinks it's, or he's claiming that it is. Years ago, the bar used to be very busy and a little later crowd, but that's come and gone.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Levin.
The plans we have show that there's an existing banquet hall with a capacity of 172 people. I don't know if it ever fills up with 172 people. My question is will that remain as, it sounds like that's a catering operation?
Yes.
And will that remain with the additional catering in the new space?
Yes.
So
Yes.
you're doubling you're increasing the catering capacity.
Yes.
Not the general restaurant capacity.
Exactly.
Okay. And do you anticipate having catering? So the thing about catering events is that people all come for a purpose. They come at a particular time.
Yes.
All together.
Yeah.
How do you imagine the scheduling of that?
In what way? With the events?
Yeah. Are you going to have
Well,
both halls filled to start at the same time? Or
No, I don't think the kitchen would be able to hold that capacity. And then you got to turn a room over and clean it. So I would not think so. We do a lot of small, affordable, like 25 bridal showers, baby showers, from 20 people, to 75 or 100. But the majority of them could be a 50, a 30, or stuff like that.
Thank you. Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Pyle.
All right, thanks for your consideration.
Our next speaker is Thomas Brady.
Good afternoon. My name is Tom Brady, and I reside at 5417 65th Place, directly across the street from O'Neill's Restaurant. I'm a lifelong resident of Maspeth and lived there for 61 years. This afternoon, I not only speak for myself, but I speak on behalf of my mother, who owns that home, Florence Brady, and is 90 years old. She's also a lifelong resident of Maspeth and lived in that same home for 78 years, directly across the street. We received a letter from the community board about the rezoning and the second floor addition to O'Neill's. Both of us have discussed that in depth. I come here before you this afternoon to express our approval of that said addition and rezoning. O'Neill's has been a part of the community since 1933. As well as an outstanding neighbor. We've seen firsthand over the years the many functions and benefits that are held there. Although there are many, most noteworthy are what they do for the children and widows of the FDNY and the NYPD, as well as St. Jude's Children's Hospital. In closing, I'd like to thank you for your time and letting me voice my opinion in this matter. I hope you will all take into consideration all I have told you in making your decision. Furthermore, I have one other thing to say about the parking. It's been brought up that when the bar burnt down, the parking in the neighborhood got better. That's not true, okay? In that neighborhood, there's we have the co-ops up the hill. They're big apartment houses. We have the Gables next to the bar, another apartment house. So I seen firsthand, as well as we have 2 bus lines that stop on either side of the street on 65th Place. Now, I seen people come, park in front of our home. They don't go in any of the bars or the stores there. They walk up to the Gables or they walk up to the co-op. And they'll leave their car there for 5 days in front of our house, okay? Then it's not O'Neill's problem, it's the neighborhood. The neighborhood always had, we had some parking issues, so they have things to address it, And I just want to let you know, it's not all the bar, There's other factors there that people come down to get on the bus, okay? Get on the bus, we're 7 miles from Manhattan. They park their car in the morning. There's people go to work. There's no cars on the street. They park the car, and off they come to Manhattan.
Thank you, Mr. Brady.
You're welcome.
Questions? Yes, Commissioner Levin.
Since you live across the street, can you ever tell by smell what's cooking inside the restaurant?
Yes. Yeah, you can.
Yeah, so
especially when they're cooking them hamburgers.
Yeah, is that an issue for you?
Oh,
cooking exhaust?
Not at all.
You don't get tired of the hamburgers?
No. Do I look like I do?
Oh yeah, so guess not. So how does what's the neighbor's experience of exhaust from the restaurant?
The exhaust from the restaurant?
Yeah. Is there a smokestack? What? You see it floating at you?
You know what? I never really looked at it that close to see if there's but you can smell when they're cooking.
That's an answer enough.
But it's not unpleasant.
Okay.
Far from it.
Okay. I guess I only ask because I live next to a really unpleasant one. So
no, this one's okay.
Okay. Good. I'm coming out there then.
Okay.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Brady.
You're welcome.
Our next speaker is Nicole Callender.
Okay. Hello, my name is Nicole Callender. I have been living in Maspeth for as long as I can remember, and I also work at O'Neill's. I support O'Neill's rezoning. O'Neill's does a great deal of charity, such as their St. Jude's event, and they do local school events, and they do so much more. They provide employment for many people and are always looking to hire locals. And O'Neill's is a family-run establishment, and you can tell by how they run the restaurant that they care about Maspeth and they care about the people of Maspeth. And when it comes to parking, I've spoken to my grandma about this, and she's lived there just about 50 years. And she'll tell you that times are changing and that one household doesn't have one car anymore. My household we have 4 cars on a usual basis, and we have the capacity to park 4 cars, but half the time you have people parking on the streets when they shouldn't. They should be using their own actual parking that comes with their home, but they don't. So O'Neill's doesn't really have an effect on parking the way people presume it to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Callender? Thank you. Our next speaker is James McNamara.
Hello, how you doing? I'm a resident of Glednale. I am a longtime patron of O'Neill's. He is so great for the community with St. Jude's and how much he raises. And what's he asking for? A rooftop. He's not asking for the world. It's a rooftop. I'm all for this. I think I never have a problem parking. I go there frequently. You always find a spot. True, I go there earlier, but you always find a spot. I'm just all for it, and thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. McNamara? Thanks.
Thanks.
Those are the only speakers who are registered. If there is anyone else who would be interested in speaking, now's the time. The public hearing is closed.
Borough of Staten Island, calendar number 37, CD2, C170178, ZMR. A public hearing in the matter of an application for a zoning map amendment concerning 3132-3136 Victory Boulevard.
There will be a 10-minute presentation by the applicant team comprised of Adam Rothkrug, Robert Schuster, and Cesar Arlia.
Good afternoon, Chair Lago, members of the Commission. Adam Rothkrug on behalf of C&A Realty Holding, connection with the proposed rezoning at 3122 to 30 Victory Boulevard to change the map from an R3X C22 to a C81. Proposed development is in the Bull's Head section of Staten Island, and our property consists of 3 lots totaling 22,400 square feet and change, operated for more than 30 years as the Victory Auto Center. The 3 lots include a former car wash, which had previously had BSA approval that expired, the existing repair shop, which is legal non-conforming use established in 1948, and a vacant lot that's used for vehicle storage. The proposed rezoning will bring the 3 lots into compliance and permit construction of an addition to the existing repair shop, which is currently approximately 5,000 square feet in area and is required so that they can retain their contracts with Geico and some of the other insurance companies that require them to have more space. In addition to the development site, the area proposed to be rezoned includes 2 lots to the east of the subject premises. Those 2 lots include a legally non-conforming automotive service use, a car wash and repair facility, as well as a site on the corner of Richmond and Victory, which is operated as a Tim Horton donut and coffee store. This area was previously rezoned in 2011. The C22 commercial overlay was added. Again, even though these uses consisted of C8 type uses, when city planning rezoned it, they assigned a C22 district. The C81 permits a commercial FAR of 1, permits use groups 4 to 14 and 16, which would include the proposed automotive uses. Buildings cannot exceed the sky exposure plane, which begins at 30 feet above the street line, and parking requirements are usually 1 space per 600 square feet. It does not permit residential use. This application was approved by Community Board 2, and it was also approved by the Borough President's Office with condition. The Borough President's Office discussed a condition that would prohibit billboards on the site. We are in favor of that. We've agreed to restrict our site from having no billboards. More importantly, when we looked at the underlying zoning, we believe that pursuant to Section 3267 of the zoning resolution, that commercial billboards would not be permitted in this C8 district because it faces a residential district. We've tried to confirm this with technical review at city planning, but I would note that there is a recent court decision involving a signage that faced a MX district. That was denied by the Department of Buildings, which found that an MX district, because it includes a residential district, prohibits signage. And that was recently upheld by the Appellate Division of the State of New York. So we believe that this restriction these sites all face residential districts in all directions, and the same restrictions would apply. So this is the area to be rezoned. As you see, the blue is, there is some commercial overlay, but they are underlying residential districts, so we do not believe that any billboards would be permitted. We would be willing to sign a restrictive declaration. We've spoken to the adjacent owner who has the car wash, and they're in favor of this because they would bring his property into conformance, allow him to improve it, and he indicated that he would most likely be willing to agree to no billboards as well. We have not been able to get a commitment from the Tim Hortons site. But again, as I said, more important is that we don't think that billboards are permitted at this location. With regard to the other uses that would be permitted by the commercial district, I would say this, that right now is a non-conforming use group 16 use. Either of these sites, our site and the adjacent auto site, could have been converted to other use group 16 uses as of right under the 5200 section, allowing changes from one non-conforming use to another one. With regard to the other uses that are permitted, certainly the Tim Hortons on the corner is a very viable and thriving retail area that really doesn't lend itself to manufacturing or industrial uses. The properties the other two properties have been used for auto uses for more than 60 or 70 years. Those uses appear to be more viable than any of the other uses that would be permitted. And there are some noxious uses permitted in C8, but it doesn't appear that they would be appropriate or economically viable at this location. Animal crematoriums or things like that could find less expensive, non-centrally located facilities that could suit the same purpose. So we don't think that this will allow the introduction of any noxious uses into the area, and we think that this area, as it has been for the last 70 years or so, will remain a small enclave of auto uses that the community appreciates and has been using for the last 50 or 60 years, as evidenced by the support of the community board. I have the two owners, actually, one didn't sign up, Anthony LaCava and Cesar Alia, as well as the architect, Robert Schuster, available to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions from the commission? Commissioner Cirillo.
Adam, hi, how are you?
Hey, Commissioner. Good.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I will begin by saying that you've obviously addressed most of the, I guess, critical concerns that the borough president had on the application. And I know there were a couple of others you didn't mention. We can get to them briefly in a moment, but I just want to focus on the most critical one, which had to do with the sort of the as-of-right signage related issues, and including billboards that could occur there. And as somebody who knows the area and myself, I think we would all agree that that is an unlikely appropriate location for that kind of reality. But with that said, you raised an interesting point, and I don't know if you have a formal written analysis of why you believe that even though you and your client are willing to enter into or engage a restricted declaration on this issue, that the signage would be prohibited just based on the surrounding neighborhood. I would ask that you would share that with us, and certainly we would check. This is an issue for us as well to look into independently. That certainly would eliminate the concern that existed if that use were prohibited, by law and just in the nature of the community. But I guess I still need to focus, and I appreciate that you wanted to ask the relationship between the applicant and the other property owners who are benefiting from this application, because, and I'm assuming neither of them are here, so that's a little bit of a challenge to, get you on the record on their behalf, but perhaps you are familiar with discussions that have taken place with them. And I also want to acknowledge and appreciate that you said that the adjoining owner, I guess the one with the car wash, is also willing to enter into a restricted declaration for the signage use, whether or not we'll say it's necessary. What do we do about the other property? That is a challenge. It's an unfair question in a way, but it isn't, because you are the applicant that is incorporating the property. So, but I realize you are not their representative, but it is somewhat of a catch-22 here, because there is no challenge to the existing use. Obviously, the community has embraced this business. If it didn't, it wouldn't be looking to expand in the same location. It has a longstanding existence here. But where we're going with the zoning creates opportunities that have not been permissible there. And I know we can't see completely into the future, but there is an issue as to what potentially could occur on the lot that is not at the table right now. And how do we ensure, on behalf of the community, that this does not become an issue, or I'll leave it at that. How this does not become an issue in the future.
Sure. So obviously, given the short time, we were able to, and we have tried to engage with both of the other owners throughout the course of this this process. So,
sorry.
So two things.
My time was up. I had the longest question ever. I took 7 minutes to ask the question, but that's.
So two things I would say. One is, again, we looked at the zoning and we feel very comfortable, and even given a court decision which just came out last month in June, that this restriction does prohibit billboards. If not, I would say this. One, I believe we will have the agreement of the adjacent owner. Two, with regard to the Tim Hortons, I would say that we do know who the owner is. We've reached out. We didn't get a response. I would say there may be a technical review option of leaving the C22 and not cutting back the C8 that we've proposed. It doesn't really, I don't think it adversely affects the zoning application. I don't think it creates a spot zoning situation. It still is a swath of property that has had automobile uses in the past. I don't think it would bring anything out of scope. But again, as a zoning attorney for a long time, I looked at this section of law, I looked at the recent court decision, and again, I feel confident, or I'm hopeful, that the city planning technical review will agree that these signs just would not be permitted, because all of these properties face residential districts, and the fact that these residential districts have commercial overlays does not make them not residential districts. They're still residential districts. And if you face a residential district, you're not allowed to have advertising signage that faces within 165 degrees. So this has been upheld as applied to MX districts, and obviously MX you would think are less restrictive than commercial overlays. So so I think we are, we're going to pursue both options. One, clarify the zoning on it, and hopefully technical review will agree. And we still intend on reaching out to the other owners to see whether they will agree to, again, restrict restrict the use of their properties to prohibit billboards.
Okay.
If I could ask whether you're prepared to submit something in writing with your analysis of the signage situation.
Absolutely.
Great. And then the second, I want to clarify, are you amending your zoning application? Because that would be a very significant matter for the department.
This is, no, we are not amending our zoning application at the current time. No, we are not amending our zoning application.
And I just had one follow-up question.
And I apologize, it's really just something that came to mind right during this hearing, if that would, alleviate that concern, since we were able to get the consent of the adjacent owner.
That might have been a legitimate consideration for the Board of Standards and Appeal.
I just have a question, which I guess it's more curious, but it is something that I guess regardless of or depending on the answer, creates an issue potentially for the future. Is the applicant is listed as a realty holding company? Is it a family?
The operator.
Forgive me, I don't know. I see the applicants here. But can you describe? Is this the same family that's owned this property? When did the owner come into ownership of this? 1999. Oh, I'm sorry.
In 1999. And he's not just the owner, he's also the operator of the repair facility.
The owner and the operator.
Yeah, he's
okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to sort of frame the ownership, which I'm not surprised about. Right. But I just wanted to clarify it because the one thing, obviously, and you could understand this, that providing this zoning opportunity for a development company that potentially, and I know nothing stops this from happening anyway, the last thing the community might need to be concerned about is a billboard when the possibilities for development under the C8 for all the things that you mentioned in your opening statement about potential noxious uses and other uses that we might consider as inappropriate or not potentially successful doesn't mean they won't necessarily happen, and they certainly would be options. So I just wanted to understand the structure, at least at this moment in time, while we're considering this application, of what is the ownership and what is the desire here?
Sure.
And, are we really supporting a family, a small business, and their growth in a community, or are we helping to set the stage for?
Well, again, the C8, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. So the C8 one does not create a lot of floor area. It creates some additional uses, but I think if you look at the additional uses, a lot of the additional uses are large entertainment uses, open and enclosed, which are not viable. It's just not large enough site. That wouldn't have enough parking. Some of the smaller, let's say uses that might be noxious, I would say if you look at this area, if you look at the history of usage of both of these properties for the last 60 or 70 years as automotive uses, there doesn't appear to be a demand why at this location, one of these obnoxious uses would want to be. And certainly on the corner of Richmond and Victory, that certainly doesn't lend itself to any of those uses. So I don't think, and the final point I said was that either the existing car wash or our current repair facility under the 5200 section, they could actually be converted. They wouldn't be able to expand the existing floor area, but they could convert their existing buildings if there was a demand to have any of those uses at this location. And that would have applied for the last 60 years since 1961, and it just hasn't happened. So,
and I apologize for taking this time, but in our report, it indicated that obviously this is a legal non-conforming existing use. So really this application helps facilitate the growth of this business, right? So what is causing the violations to be issued? if this is a legal non-conforming use, what has happened or what is happening that is creating that situation?
Yeah, sorry. So our site consists of 3 lots. One lot has the existing non-conforming repair facility that's been there for 60 or 70 years. The adjacent lot to the east is a lot that had Board of Standards and Appeals approval as a car wash. That expired. We had been leasing it to the car wash operator. We took it back. We started using it as part of our facility. The BSA renewal, the BSA variance was not renewed. That expired in 2007. So the current use of that is not legal. It's non-conforming. And to the west of us is a vacant lot. There's no history of any development ever on that lot that we've been using to park cars on.
Okay, so there is
one
a
of
use.
Okay. Yeah. So our building, the main building, repair building, is legal non-conforming. The 2 outer parcels are not are non-conforming but not legal. This will bring them into conformance.
Understand. Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Levin.
I've had a similar line of concern, but not as thoroughly articulated as Commissioner Cirillo's. But look, you just look at the zoning map and you consider what a C81 is all about, and as your colleague in this business, Marcy Kestner, characterized it to us in an earlier application. It's really meant to be a bridge between manufacturing and heavy commercial. Well, you look at this neighborhood, and that's not what's going on in this neighborhood. And it just so happens that the use that your client seeks to retain here, use group 16, falls into the C8. But there's nothing about the surrounding. The surrounding really says commercial, not manufacturing. So I have a similar line of concern about what the potential unintended consequences might be of giving that site the expanded opportunities. I think you've disposed of the large entertainment use, which is possible. There's also large retail. Maybe that fits, maybe it doesn't with parking. But all of it makes me wonder whether returning to the BSA, leaving the zoning so that it fits the zoning map makes sense, and going back to BSA for a variance. Is that a possible route here? And
so, yeah, so let me address that.
That's rhetorical, I realize.
Yeah, no, it's
now
not.
You're here, you've chosen this path.
No, it's not rhetorical. So obviously, for a rezoning, I think we would all agree it's clearly important to have community support, because without community support, you're not getting political support from the city council at the end of the day. So before you propose a C8 rezoning, you have to know that this community is going to be supportive. And to get the strong support of the community board and from the borough president for C8, I think speaks to their belief and understanding that the history of this property's use, and even before the current owners, going back to the 40s and 50s, that this was a small area of Staten Island where it just so happened auto uses, seem to situate. But in direct answer to your question, we did investigate going to the Board of Standards and Appeals going back 4 or 5 years before we started this process, and they were not amenable to a variance being granted at that time. So we didn't undertake this lightly.
Here you are.
We have been at this for 4 or 5 years. For a repair shop, but the business and his location here and his history here is important to Mr. Arlia. And again, I think that to some extent, the fact that you don't have a room full of people opposing a C8 district coming to their neighborhood, there aren't really a lot of houses around here. Mr. Arlia knows all the homeowners in person. And again, I think it speaks to itself that we obtained community board support. We wouldn't have undertaken it unless we thought the community was going to be supportive of this action. So, you know, we have to rest our hands and reputation on that.
That's helpful, thank you. And it's also worth noting that there are two large gas stations, across the intersection on two adjoining corners. So it is an automotive.
It absolutely is, and the C2 zoning that was put in place here really wasn't that helpful because these lots for commercial uses really couldn't compete with the shopping center that's across the street and has, you know, a load of parking and vacancies. And so this really wouldn't support new C2 uses, and it really wouldn't support any of the other, you know, I went through the list after we heard your comments from the commission on Monday, and we went through the list, and I was challenged to find any other use that really would be considered more viable to, or would say we gotta
We're not getting a Home Depot.
we got to put a huge offer in on this property because this is the only place we can be.
Helpful context, thank you.
Other questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioners.
We don't have any other speakers signed up, but if there's anyone else who would want to be heard, now's the time. Okay, this public hearing is closed. And Madam Secretary, any other business before the commission?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay, the meeting is over. Thank you.
And what time is it?
Very well. Thank you.